beautiful mind, and we call it
Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome back to the Disney Movie Marathon. Today we're talking about the next film in the Disney canon, Lady and the Tramp. But we're doing something a bit different with this one. Instead of doing a mini-series, we're doing one massive episode and talking about the entire franchise. This episode has already released as a 3-part mini-series over on the Disney Movie Marathon podcast back in June, and this kind of mega episode is the kind of thing I've been reserving for Patreon. However, I decided I might try switching things up once in a while, and since I had to wait to release it here, I thought I'd give you the full-length extended version of our conversation all in one massive mega podcast. If you like this kind of thing, let me know, and I might do it more often. I've been trying to record mini-series in batches for my various podcasts, and I've been thinking it might be a good idea to give listeners here on the main podcast more of these extended episodes. Since I'm still committed to giving you everything here that I make for other shows elsewhere, in trying to keep a consistent schedule, some of these releases have to be delayed anyway, so I thought I might as well make it worth the wait. Joining me for this project are Nicki, aka Trivial Theater, and Katie, aka Katie Draws Things. We always have so much fun getting together to talk about movies, and Lady and the Tramp was something we all grew up with, or at least the first film, and to a much lesser extent the second, so I figured this would be a really fun conversation. So, how familiar are you guys with Lady and the Tramp? Was this one that you guys grew up with, or?
The original I watched as a kid, it was one of my favorites.
Okay. Yeah, I watched this a lot as a kid.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say it was my favorite out of my little collection of VHS Disney collection, but when I wanted to watch something that wasn't like my top three favorite, this was a big one that I would go to change it up. So I watched it a lot, and it was really weird because I haven't seen it in a long time. So rewatching it, I was like, why is it just like beat for beat? I remember everything.
Uh-huh.
Well, and you look at kids' movie, Disney movies of the I guess the mid-century, and they do kind of that. There's nuance, but there's not a lot of nuance. It's just there to tell a good story.
hmm
Yeah, this was very simple compared to some other movies I've watched recently, but I think that's good for this kind of story, and they did a lot with it.
Oh yeah.
So even though the story is simple, it's very artistic in the way that they told the story.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting that this was the first movie or first animated movie made with CinemaScope, so the extremely wide screen in comparison with the regular widescreen or even full screen, which most Disney movies had been using up until this point. And they were originally planning to do this one in full screen, but then I think CinemaScope had been getting more and more popular and they decided to go with that for this.
Given the time, I could see that. There's that one theater out in LA. It's the 3 screen wide. If you're talking like westerns and things like that, or like Lawrence of Arabia type epics, they would do them
Mhm.
on those. So I could see that coming in. And I think that came in roughly the same time.
When you were watching it, did the screen aspect ratio ever stand out to you?
Not specifically. I guess you go in as long as the aspect ratio doesn't change, dramatically. I think, I guess you kind of take it where it is.
I think probably because I knew that this was the first one in CinemaScope, that was the reason that it stood out to me. But for scenes, there were certain scenes that I felt like the CinemaScope ratio improved them. And the first one that I'm specifically thinking of is the scene where Lady is trying to get Jim Deere out of bed. Because of the frame, like it's so long that to do like a close up on just Lady, Jim Deere is kind of almost completely cropped out of it. And you like it was a specific choice for them to make it so that you never really get a great look at the faces of the humans because they're so much bigger than the dogs. But I think that was really helped by the CinemaScope ratio because you can zoom in on the dogs and then everybody else just howers out of frame because it's so, I guess, so much thinner than you would normally think of a frame of a movie.
Right. I think too that you think like the Peanuts, any of the Peanuts cartoons, you only ever see the adults like waist and down, or you see hands. Like
Hmm.
the emphasis is on the dogs. The
Yeah,
people are there and they matter, but they don't matter as much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which they could do that. They could do something similar with any frame ratio, but I don't know. Maybe it's just because I had the CinemaScope ratio on the mind when I was watching it. It just seemed like it was a perfect choice for this movie.
Agreed.
I do think that like now that you mentioned that, like I do think sometimes when you get like long shots of just like landscape, I do
Mhm.
remember like being like I feel like I saw more for some reason. Like it felt
Yes.
kind of like I was seeing more than you would usually,
Hmm.
which isn't a bad thing. But like it was like I kind of did notice that, but it was kind of like a passing thought in the back of the head. So like that's interesting.
And for scenes where it's just like a landscape shot, I think it looks so good in the widescreen.
Hmm.
Like the opening scene with the town, or when they're up on the hill and you see all the cars as they're like looking down over the hill at night.
Yeah.
I think that just looks so good in such a widescreen. So are you guys familiar with where this story came from?
I didn't know.
No.
I thought it was interesting that this is kind of aside from Dumbo, this was the very first story that kind of was made up completely for a movie. Like with Dumbo, there was a book, but the book never ended up getting published, and they also deviated from it so much that it's basically its own story. But with this one, this came from an idea of one of the Walt Disney artists, Joe Grant. He was inspired by his own dog, which was an English Springer Spaniel named Lady,
Aw.
and they had a baby, and she kind of got shoved aside. And he liked this idea of telling the story from the dog's perspective of what happens when a family just has a dog and then brings home a baby.
Well, and it's kind of a tale as old as time. And I mean, you always hear people now, especially with like COVID and such. There was that, oh, we need you give so much time to whatever pet you have, and then you go back to work and you can't
Mm,
dedicate the time. But that actually makes a lot more sense now. There was a novel in the trivia. It said there was a novel that was put out 2 years before the actual movie to kind of
yes.
introduce people to the characters.
Yeah. So when he pitched this idea to Disney, Disney liked the idea and he told him to get started on fleshing out a story. But all the ideas that he came up with for the story, Disney didn't really like them. He thought Lady was too sweet and there wasn't enough action. But then he read a story in Cosmopolitan magazine called Happy Dan the Cynical Dog. And he thought the story would be much improved if Lady fell in love with a cynical dog character. So the author of that story was Ward Green. He bought the rights to that story and then got Green to kind of combine the two and make a bigger story. And before this, like in the late 40s, Grant left the studio, but Disney kept working on the idea. And this is one of the things where I think they're trying to make things right in recent years. So the story was like Joe Grant's idea, but because he left the studio and Disney brought on the author of this Happy Dan the Cynical Dog story, Ward Green got all the credit.
Ah.
So in recent years, people have been trying to bring Joe Grant back into the Disney history. Like this is where the story actually came from.
Hmm.
And that's good that they do that. It's like anything else. You're never going to be able to make it up to that person, but if you can, get it back in whatever way you can, that's huge.
Hmm. And I feel like at least around this time, that kind of thing happened probably a little too much because I know like with the Jungle Book, that's another one that stands out in my head because the artist Bill Peet was behind a lot of the Jungle Book.
Mhm.
And because of everything that happened with the Jungle Book, so many things changing, Bill Peet ended up leaving the studio and other people picked up where he left off and got all the credit. But he was the one who was like behind it in the first place.
Wasn't there a thing too, and this is slightly tangenting, which I know is unique to us, but even with Mickey Mouse, like the very foundation of Mickey Mouse when it was Mortimer Mouse, wasn't that what was the name of the
Yeah,
studio?
Iwerks.
Yeah,
Yeah, he really helped come up with the entirety of the creation, and it's kind of just all been tributed to Disney at this point.
right.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that, like you say, that's a thing that probably happened a lot and probably still does happen, which, we'll hear about in 40 years' time. But for that time and place, being that the medium was so new, kind of the Wild West.
It probably was a little bit different with Mickey because with Ub, he stayed on with the studio for decades.
Yeah.
I think they probably defaulted to giving Walt Disney the credit because he was the face of the company.
Right? Makes sense.
So it probably made more sense. I think with things like Lady and the Tramp or Jungle Book, it probably was a little bit more, I don't know, bad blood between the studio and the artists because they left the studio and then got no credit for what they did.
Right. And at that point, I'm sure it probably falls under the umbrella of, well, you created this while you were at our studio. We have those rights to those things that you did.
Hmm.
Kindly,
Yeah.
go. I'm trying to think of something that would be a nice way to put it.
Well, I'm sure, like, legally,
Oh,
everything is in the
exactly.
right, but it's not nice to the
Right.
artists.
Reputation is everything.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I also thought it was interesting in doing the research because the story kept changing so much. There was a bunch of stuff that was changed from the original ideas to what we finally saw on screen. In the original, Aunt Sarah was going to be an overbearing mother-in-law, which seems kind of like what she is anyway. So,
Well, she's kind of got that whole spinster, like the classic. You go back to that era with like old, like classic movies. The spinster aunt is just
yeah,
like that kind of person.
yeah.
Hmm.
It's very tropey for the, and not in a bad way by any stretch, but it was, kind of the trope of the era.
Hmm. And originally, her cats were going to be named Nip and Tuck instead of Cy and Anne. And Tramp also, his name kept changing. He was Homer, Rags, and Bozo at different points in the story. I think Tramp was the right choice to land on.
Yeah. I did like how they incorporated, and I'm sure that was probably just a case of him going from place to place, but like how he described like every family that like fed him had a different name for him,
Yes.
and you could kind of relate back.
Uh-huh.
I also did have to laugh, and I don't mean to jump ahead to a little bit, but they never refer to him as Tramp in
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, they always call him the Tramp.
Right.
I wonder if Jim Darren Darling ever ended up giving him a name.
Yeah, like I guess they did because if you take the sequel as canon, like everyone just calls him Tramp as a name.
Yeah.
So it's like how convenient.
Yeah, can you imagine? And I know people name their dogs and cats all kinds of things, but can you imagine, hey, Tramp, come here, Tramp.
I like the convenience that that's what all the dogs called him
Yep.
before they called him that name.
Yeah. I feel like Tramp is not, I mean, it kind of makes sense for
Oh,
a
yeah.
homeless street dog. If you adopted a dog off the street, calling him Tramp kind of, it seems fitting.
Oh, yeah. It's like calling a cat cat. You could be like John Wayne and call his dog just dog.
And did you guys know that Jim Deere and Darling are not actually their names?
I kind of figured.
The original, like in the original script, and I don't know if this is canon or not, but their names were Jim Brown and Elizabeth. And they decided to go with Jim Deere and Darling because that's what Lady hears them call each other all the time. So she just thinks that that's their names,
Ah, okay.
I could see that.
which is kind of perfect. I kind of love that.
They definitely fit the era. Like the both the proper
Mhm.
names and the terms of endearment.
Uh-huh.
What would you call the little one though? I know that in the remake it's Lulu, but I don't think does the little baby ever get a name?
Um,
Did he have a name in the sequel?
Oh, it's Junior. It's Junior in the sequel. That's what it is.
okay, yeah.
So he's probably Jim Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
J Jim Deere Jr. JDJ.
But yeah, I thought that was a really cute choice to make them named after what Lady thinks their names are. It's like kids thinking their parents are named mom and dad, and their
Yeah.
minds are blown when they find out that's not actually their names. And then I found out I completely forgot this was the last film for Disney that Mary Blair ever worked on because she was such a huge part of the studio for so many years. And she was supposed to do more on this film. She was supposed to be the background painter, but she wanted to go on to become an illustrator for children's books. So this ended up being her last film. And they had other artists come in to like do all the background work.
Oh.
Oh,
It wasn't her last thing she ever did with Disney because he asked her to come back years later to design this It's a Small World ride, but it was her last film.
I don't know if this is true or not, because sometimes the IMDb trivia can be a little bit suspect, but according to it, Peggy Lee was considered the first instance of a superstar voice being used for an animated film.
That could be. I'm trying to think of who might have been before.
I mean, from a Disney perspective, there's not that many movies that came before this, really.
The only thing that is really standing out to me would be the voice of Cinderella. And it's not the same because I don't know that you would call her a superstar because Walt Disney heard her voice on the radio, I believe.
Hmm. Honestly, I'm thinking back now that I say that. Um, I just did I went to a showing of a bunch of 16 millimeter cartoons from the 30s, and Cab Calloway had a really famous cartoon thing with Betty Boop where they did Minnie the
Hmm.
Mooch,
Yeah.
and that would be considered. I mean, it's not Disney animation, but it is still an animated piece. He was
Yeah.
massively well known at the time.
I
So I take back what I said.
well, I think it's different for some of those, especially the Betty Boop cartoons, because with Betty Boop, they did a lot of, I don't know, cameos.
Fair.
Like they would have like a music artist come in and then they would do like a caricature of them, like singing the song or doing a dance. So that was kind of a feature in some of those earlier shorts. But as far as Disney, the closest I can think of would be Cinderella, and that was Eileen Woods. She was a radio actress, and she really didn't do a ton as far as like acting for movies and TV. She only has 7 credits on IMDb,
Oh, okay.
but I think that she was famous on the radio because I don't remember who discovered her exactly, but she was a radio actress and they loved her voice and thought she would be perfect for Cinderella. But I don't know that I would call her like a superstar. But I feel
Right.
like that's probably the closest you could get. But yeah, Peggy Lee was quite famous. She was a kind of a prolific songwriter. She actually wrote a lot of the music for this. She and Sonny Burke, who's a name that I know from somewhere, but I don't know why I know. But he was a composer. He did like, I think jazz and ragtime music, which I think my parents listened to some of that when I was growing up. So maybe I heard his name somewhere in there. I know that's like another famous musician from the time. But Sonny and Peggy Lee wrote the songs together along with composer Oliver Wallace. And Oliver Wallace did a lot of the scores for Disney up until this point. This is actually his last film, too.
Wow.
Well, his last animated film. I think I read his final film was The Incredible Journey in 63, which would be a few years after this. But as far as his animation work for Disney, this was his last one. But yeah, Peggy Lee, I didn't realize, like, I knew that she was kind of famous, but I didn't realize how famous she was until I started researching for this. Apparently, she is often cited as the inspiration for the margarita. Apparently, she went to Mexico, and when she came back, she wanted something similar to what she drank there. So she told a bartender, like, roughly what to do, and he came up with the margarita and named it after the Spanish version of her name.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the thing that kind of blew my mind the most was Miss Piggy was designed after her.
Really?
The designer of Miss Piggy's original puppet, Bonnie Erickson, grew up in her home state, North Dakota, and used her as the inspiration for Miss Piggy. And actually, she was originally called Miss Piggy Lee, but then they eventually shortened her name to Miss Piggy when she became like one of the main characters of the Muppets,
Right.
which I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, that makes, hearing that like and seeing them side by side, yeah, I can see that.
Absolutely.
And Peggy Lee, she obviously voiced Peg, but she was also the voice of Cy and Am, the cats, as well as Darling,
I could see that.
which I never realized that she was also the voice of Darling.
I wouldn't have guessed it offhandedly, but now that you say it, I can definitely hear it.
Hmm. And there was a bunch of actors in here that voiced a lot of characters. Like I know that a lot of people do that even nowadays, but it's usually just like the side characters and like the background characters that they just bring on a handful of voice actors and then they just do a bunch. But everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of the main people in this voiced a bunch of people
Yeah.
or dogs.
Yeah.
Because you had Jim Deere was Lee Miller. He was also the voice of the dog catcher. And actually, he was also, I didn't realize that, he was the son of Verna Felton, who played Aunt Sarah. And he didn't have, he wasn't a huge actor. I'm not sure. It was kind of confusing because when I looked him up on IMDb, it says he voiced Pluto in a bunch of cartoons in the 30s and 40s. But his father is also named Lee Miller, and he has way more Pluto credits on his page. So I'm wondering if somebody at IMDb screwed up and
Huh.
got them mixed up.
It happens. It's kind of like Wikipedia. It's moderated, but it's not moderated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wonder. He obviously has Disney connections, but I was kind of wondering if maybe Verna Felton was the closest connection that got him this job, because she's like, I don't want to say she's Disney royalty, but she kind of almost is because she's like so many iconic characters. Like you have a lot of people that were in a bunch of Disney movies that were in a bunch and like everybody kind of knows them, but Verna Felton, she was the fairy godmother in Cinderella, the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, Flora in Sleeping Beauty. And then my favorite thing is that she voiced elephants in both Dumbo and The Jungle Book. Her first and last roles for Disney was voicing elephants. And she also voiced an elephant in a short called Goliath II, which I thought was great. I love her voice. And then Lady was voiced by Barbara Luddy, who was a silent actress in the 20s and 30s. And then I think in a couple of early, I guess you would call them talkies with voices. But she stopped acting in 1933. And this was her first film back 22 years later in
Wow.
1955. And then she kind of went on to become an actor for small roles. She was in a bunch of Disney films and she did a bunch of one-off TV appearances. But she was also the voice of Merryweather in Sleeping Beauty, Rover in 101 Dalmatians, which I think is the puppy that loves watching TV. And she was the Mrs. Churchmouse in Robin Hood, as well as the Mother Rabbit, and also Kanga in the Winnie the Pooh shorts from the 60s and 70s, which was her final role. Because she died in 1979.
She had such a cute voice.
Yes, she did. And one of the most interesting things that I discovered was Tramp was voiced by Larry Roberts, who he was mostly a stage actor. He only really has one other role on IMDb. And after Lady and the Tramp, he pretty much completely retired from acting and went on to become a women's clothing designer. I don't know why that just cracked me up when I read that.
That's cool.
What an interesting pivot.
Variety is the spice of life.
At least he went out on probably his most iconic role.
Absolutely. Yeah, but his voice, it is a very attractive voice. So I'm sure
Yeah.
trying to sell to women or get across the point, I could see it working.
And then most everybody else in this movie were people who did a bunch of voices. You have Bill Thompson as Jock, the Scottish Terrier. He also voiced Joe, the assistant chef, and Bull, the male bulldog. Like I don't remember these names, but these are ones that are credited as these because I don't really remember anybody except Peg of all of the random dogs. And Doxy, the stray male dog. I always want to say Dachshund because of the way it's spelled, but it's Dachshund. He voiced the Irish policeman, which I kind of figured when he started talking, I was like, that's the same voice actor as Jock.
Yeah, his Irish accent and his Scottish accent sound kind of similar.
Yeah.
Just don't say that to any Scottish or Irish people in real life and you'll be fine. I will say his song was always one of my favorites. I don't know why, but when I was a kid, I'd always try to like mimic that song because I thought it was cool. I was a weird kid.
But he was actually a really good voice actor because I didn't realize it was the same person who voiced Mr. Smee and the White Rabbit
Oh, yeah.
from Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. Like, because his voice for those are so similar, but this doesn't sound anything like those. But then he was also King Hubert in Sleeping Beauty and Uncle Waldo in The Aristocats. And he was the first voice actor to ever play Scrooge McDuck on screen,
Oh.
which kind of makes sense after hearing Jock.
Yes.
But he had a good range for what he could do. And then you had Stan Freberg as the Beaver. And I read that he was later the inspiration for Gopher from Winnie the Pooh. But when I was a kid, I used to think they were the same character.
Yeah, I think, yeah, same.
But he's most known for like tons of shorts. Like he did a lot of Looney Tunes voices. I think his most famous was Pete, Puma, and Junior Bear. And then he was one of the chipmunks of the Goofy Gophers. I wouldn't have known which one is which because I can't tell them apart, but he was Tosh. And then he did all the voices in the short The Three Little Bops, which is kind of the other really famous version of The Three Little Pigs. Besides Disney's, it was the Looney Tunes version of The Three Little Pigs. And then you had Alan Reed as Boris, I don't know how to pronounce it, Borzoi, Borzoi, the dog with the Russian accent.
Uh-huh.
But he's best known as Fred Flintstone. Which
Serious? Oh my
yeah,
God.
I was like, whoa, I did not realize that Fred Flintstone was in Lady and the Tramp. And then you had probably here as this character because he was there for the music and they just gave him Al the Alligator. You had Thurl Ravenscroft, but he was a member of the Mellow Men who did a bunch of music like singing for kind of the background stuff, but they were in so many old Disney movies that I didn't even realize. And because of that, he has been in a ton of Disney movies. The one that is probably least musical is he was Monstro in Pinocchio, the whale. But he was also in Dumbo, Saludos Amigos, Melody Time, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, all the Winnie the Pooh shorts, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, Mary Poppins, The Jungle Book, 101 Dalmatians, Sword in the Stone, The Aristocats, and then Brave Little Toaster, which is sort of Disney and sort of not Disney. It's a muddy history there, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like Roger Rabbit.
Kind of, yes. But he also did voices for Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, and the Tiki Room at Disneyland. And then later he came back and did even more voices for later attractions like Splash Mountain and the Railroad.
It's kind of like is it Chauncey Brown or
Clancy Brown.
That does all the, like, anytime there's like an animal sound or some kind of, like, you might have a slight speaking role, but by and large it's more almost sound effect-esque, that kind of a voice.
I don't think that's Clancy Brown. I think that is.
Who am I thinking of? I can't offhandedly think of who that is.
I think you're thinking of Frank Welker.
Yeah, Frank Welker.
Is it Frank
really
Welker?
big.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does some speaking roles, obviously, like Fred Jones from Scooby-Doo, but he's very good at like animals and stuff.
But Clancy Brown, I suppose he probably could, but he's most known for like
I'm
Mr.
thinking
Krabs and
D.
SpongeBob.
Bradley. I'm thinking of D.
Oh.
Bradley Baker.
D. Bradley Baker also does that.
Yes,
Okay,
that's who I was thinking of. I apologize.
I mean, there's more than one person who is good at lots of
Yeah.
different kinds of voice acting.
Oh yeah, agreed.
But yeah, Thurl Ravenscroft did a lot of animal noises too. Like I said, his first one for Disney was the whale in Pinocchio.
He's got a great name. That's an incredible name.
Oh yeah, I love his name. It's kind of funny though, the thing that he's most known for, because so many of his roles were just bit parts, the thing he's best known for now is he was the voice of Tony the Tiger for Frosty Flakes.
Was it great?
He did a great job.
Ah,
I didn't realize he also voiced Jeffrey the Giraffe for Toys R Us in the 70s and 80s also. And of course, he also sang You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch in the original Grinch cartoon.
nice.
But yeah, he has a great voice.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys know this, but I feel like this is one of the most famous stories about Lady and the Tramp. The opening sequence when Darling unwraps the hat box that Lady is inside. It was inspired by Walt Disney himself when he gave his wife Lily a chow puppy as a gift in a hat box to make up for having previously forgotten a dinner date with her.
Aw. I feel like that either might have been a thing or it became a thing, because in a lot of movies, at least, you'll see like that same scene sort of play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, the town that they go through was based off of Marceline, Missouri, which is where Disney was from.
Yeah, they did such a great job with that old town. It looked like such
They did.
I don't know, homey place to live.
Very much.
It felt real.
Yeah,
It did.
and I love the house designs, especially Lady's house.
It's funny that it's based off Missouri though, because in the second one they all sing about how it's a New England town.
Oh, did they?
Well, I think the it was based off of his hometown, but it wasn't necessarily set in.
Yeah.
So
It's just funny that like they based it off a place, and then I think like the sequel people weren't clued in on that, and so they're like, welcome to our New England town. I don't remember how the lyrics go.
Well, this kind of all over the place. The first one, really, you don't get a location on. The second one is in New England. The third one is set, or the remake is set in New Orleans.
Yeah.
I guess they're just going for Americana and they wanted to
Yeah.
put flavor in each film. Yeah, like I said, it's a pretty simple plot. You have it start out with she's a gift from Jim Deere to Darling. And I love the scene where they're trying to get her to stay in her little bed. Like you can tell that they actually studied dogs for this. Just the way that she moved and behaved and the little howls outside the door, it felt
Yeah.
so real.
Yeah, for sure. Like I've had puppies and that's basically what we had to kind of go through.
Aw.
Like they're just like, I want to be with you all the time, and you're like, you can't, I'm sorry. They skipped over the potty training session though, which
He put down a newspaper, so
yeah, I know.
that's all that counts, I guess.
I mean that's how easy it is. You just put down the newspaper and bam, your puppy's potty trained.
They just know.
They're like, oh yeah, we know. Your carpets are not a newspaper. We can tell the difference because we're dogs, and that's just how it works, I guess.
I feel like even though most of the dogs in this movie are well behaved, it's just like even the scene with Lady, like I love Lady as a character, but like this is why I'm a cat person.
Yeah, same.
I don't want to be needed that much.
Oh.
Agreed.
I like dogs, but I don't want to keep one with me all the time.
That's funny. I'm a dog person, so but they're so precious.
I feel like if I could find a dog that was
Like a
like
cat.
like happy to do its own thing when I'm not around,
Yeah.
not need me to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I like dogs. I had one when I was a kid. I've never wanted to get a new one after. Yeah, it's just I'm fine with cats because they do their own thing and you can cuddle them when they're ready and that's that's good
And
enough for me.
they'll probably let go of you before you'll want to let go of them.
Yeah, usually.
My cat is right next to the mic right now and agrees with me.
It would be nice if sometimes he would be a little more open to
Sorry,
what was
he
that?
agrees. That was my cat.
Oh,
Wanted to make sure he had his say.
I was just gonna say it would be nice if maybe he was slightly more like a dog and that he wouldn't try to run away when I grab him to like give him a hug because he does not like being picked up. Like he'll come to you and he'll maybe sometimes get on your lap, but if you like try and pick him up, it's squirming until he can jump down to the floor.
I would agree. They do it on their time, not on yours.
Yeah.
That's why they
Which is
say
mostly
dogs are
fine.
owned, cats are served.
Pretty much, yeah. But then another thing that I really liked, like kind of going back to the fact that she thinks her owners' names are Jim Deere and Darling. Everything is told from the dog's perspective so that you kind of have to figure out what's going on. Like they eventually do say it, but I
Yeah.
like the way they introduce the idea of Darling being pregnant with Lady telling Jock and Trusty about her owner's weird behavior.
Yeah.
And I mean, it becomes kind of obvious, and then they actually go out and say it. But I like that they kind of just show you things, and then you, the audience, figure it out.
Yeah, I think this movie like really is a good showcase of show, don't tell.
Yes, yeah.
So much of it is that. Like they don't sit down and be like, "Oh, this is obviously we are the rich people up here and those over there.
Mhm.
They're not the rich people," which, definitely won't I didn't have a problem with any other movies after this one that really was heavy-handed about that kind of stuff.
I sense your foreshadowing.
I'm showing, not telling.
Ah, you're showing, not telling on what is essentially a podcast.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I think we can all infer your meaning, though.
Yeah.
What? I have no idea. You guys got me.
It'll be such a twist.
Oh, I'm excited.
But yeah, I think that they did a really good job with like, they show you like the baby bottles in the little boots, and then like they
Hmm.
don't say, "Oh, we're at a baby shower." Like when I was a kid, I didn't understand. I didn't know what a baby shower was. So I was like, "Oh, they're all just," but I understood like they're all getting together and they're talking about the baby.
Hmm.
Like I barely understood that scene as a child because like I never went to a baby shower when I was really little, and I was like, I don't understand what they're saying. But like it really just like you're like it's different, it's strange, what's going on, and then like obviously at the end you can figure out, oh, it is a baby and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But like I think it's really well done, and it doesn't like talk down to you or over explain things sometimes, which some movies can end up doing, and I really enjoy that about the original.
Absolutely. But obviously that doesn't happen in any of the sequels to this.
The sequels are perfect, maybe.
Yeah.
I definitely was not frowning the entire time I was watching the sequel, but I'll talk about that later.
Yes. I'm trying very hard not to talk about anything that came after this.
Yeah.
It is kind of hard not to compare, though, especially with the next chunk of movie where Jim Deere and Darling leave, because I feel like this movie does it so perfectly, and then it's not done perfectly in the future.
Yeah.
But the way they set this all up so that Lady can have her adventure with Tramp, having Jim Deere and Darling leave and leaving her and the baby with Aunt Sarah and also Cy and Am. It's kind of perfect storytelling. And I feel like writers today should take some cues.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like everything makes sense. Like you're never confused of like why did someone make that decision or why did that happen that way. Even when it gets kind of wild, like let's go to the zoo to take off our harness. Like technically that doesn't make any logical sense in a leap of logic, but like it makes sense within the world and you're never like, what is going on? Why is this happening?
Hmm. I feel like for a movie like this, it doesn't have to make absolute perfect sense. I feel like
Yeah.
it makes more sense here than it almost needs to, but
Hmm.
it is a cartoon. So I'm okay with a leap in logic like Tramp seeing her get this muzzle put on her and taking her to get it bitten off by an alligator. It's kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous, but it's also a cartoon, and I'm okay with that here.
And if we're talking weird stuff that happens in cartoons, this is pretty logical in the grand scheme of cartoon logic.
I mean,
Yeah.
I almost feel like this is less cartoony than I don't want to keep jumping ahead to the remake, but like the scene with Cy and Am, I feel like the way they did it makes more sense in this movie than in the remake, because with this, Cy and Am, they are acting antagonistic, and I feel like they do just enough damage to get Lady in trouble. But in the remake, they just basically go all out wild
They go ham, no doubt.
to a ridiculous degree, but I feel like it's much more restrained in this one, and it's just perfect because I love the way that they act. They're so mischievous, like they are so Siamese. Like if you've ever had a Siamese cat, this is how they are. It's so real. Like my uncle loved Siamese cats, and Sarah also likes Siamese to a degree. She doesn't want a Siamese, like a purebred Siamese, but she always makes special, like if she's going to get a new cat, she always looks in the shelters for something that says that they think it is part Siamese because they're just mischievous enough, I guess. Like the Siamese, they're little pills. They will destroy things if you don't watch them. And they knew what they were doing when they put Siamese cats as the antagonists of this movie.
What was that about cats being better than dogs earlier?
It depends on the
Did,
cats. I
did
I
do.
have a
I
black cat, and my black cat, although he can be a hellion, he is also sweet as the day is long.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just joking.
No, I know,
yeah.
I know. I'm just
You
being.
dirty cat lovers.
I would put a Siamese cat in the same category as a dog in that I like them. I do not want one.
They're good from afar.
Yes. Yeah. Like, no, I prefer a cat that is just chilled out. Like, I really like Maine Coons. They're so chill. They're almost a little like a dog in that they can be playful, but they're so
And
chill.
so huge.
Yes.
Also, you have to shave them.
You don't have to, but if you don't take care of their fur, then you will have to because it'll get
Yeah.
knotted up.
Right. I have friends that have a Maine Coon and they shave it because during the summertime it just gets so hot.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is also a consideration, especially in Iowa.
Yes.
But yeah, the whole scene with Cyanam, I really liked it. Like even like obviously now the song is questionable.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
the stereotype that they're obviously alluding to, I will say it's not cool,
Hmm.
but I will say, whilst I don't agree with the stereotype of the song and the attitude of the cats and what they're based off of, it's better than the song in the remake. I know no comparison,
Yes, I was holding my tongue until we get there, but you are very correct.
but I think just the issue I have with the remake song is that it just didn't really have a tune to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an issue, yeah.
Like I can't remember how it went.
No, me neither. And I just watched it this morning.
You
Yeah,
know what it
like
reminds me of? It's kind of like the songs, any of the songs from Wish. There is just no, it's catchy, but it doesn't stick with you. There's nothing there that stands out.
yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
That is my personal preference. I have a vendetta against Wish, but that is my personal thing.
Yeah, no, you're amongst like-minded people with that one.
Yay!
I think how long do we talk about Wish, Jonathan?
I I haven't fully well, I did finish the first half of that podcast, and I
Oh
feel
God.
the longest section of all of the movies before our top 10 was definitely Wish. I don't remember how long it was, but it was the longest section.
I just remember like we talked about Wish for a very long time, and then whenever we talked about another movie, we're like, unlike some movies, cough cough, Wish, cough cough. This movie, like, we found any way to like rag on Wish for the
I
rest of the
knew I liked you
podcast.
guys.
I feel like Wish was one of those things where it had so much potential, and they kind of
Mhm.
squandered it. But we shouldn't be talking about Wish
Yeah.
because we already
Right.
talked about it enough for this year. in, in several years, I might finally get there in the canon, and we could talk about it again. But yeah, we talked about it enough for a while.
One thing this is more back to, I guess, design and all that kind of stuff, but you talk about how the cats and the dogs really behaved like cats and dogs of that era. Um, with the house, the lady's house was actually, they built a replica of it so that way they knew kind of how to place people.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
That's
okay.
That
according
that
to IMDb, but so again, it may not be 100% accurate, but being how much they tried to make it right, I wouldn't be surprised if they took the time to really go into those extra details.
hmm Well, even if they just planned it out, they wouldn't really even have to build the whole thing. I feel like they're doing more than a lot of other. I can't think of anything specific, but there will be times when you're watching something, and sometimes something will just stand out to you, and like, how does that make sense with what happened in that room? Like, how did they fit together?
Hmm.
Well, one of the things that I can think of is I think it's Seinfeld, the way that apartment is set up and based on the doors outside, the way the apartment is built does not make sense. Also, another like I'm talking about sitcoms, so not exactly the same, but Full House. I remember watching Full House as a kid and thinking the door didn't look right because of the way the door looked from the outside and the way it looked from the inside. I was like, I don't think that's the same door. But yeah, it makes perfect sense to like build a small replica or just plan it out. And I feel like if anybody's going to do something that detail oriented, it's going to be Disney and his team.
Oh yeah. Well, especially at that time in history. Not to say that animation was new out the box at that point in time, but you were still in kind of that classic era
Hmm.
where the time and energy, and not to say there's a lot of good stuff that's put out now, but the time and energy that went into it was like a mandate almost,
Hmm.
be that unwritten or not.
Disney was always trying to push the boundaries beyond what people of the like his contemporaries were doing. Because a lot of studios would try and cut corners wherever they could, and he wanted to make sure things looked as best as they could. Sometimes to his detriment. because like thinking in a few years when they would go on to make 101 Dalmatians, it was necessary to cut corners with the introduction of the Xerox so that they could do all the dogs and all the spots and make everything look like it worked. And Disney didn't like how it looked, but I do. Like a lot of people
Yeah.
love how 101 Dalmatians looks now, but it didn't look perfect to him. So he definitely did a good job in being detail oriented, but I would say that once in a while he could take it a bit too far.
Hmm.
Not for this movie though. But yeah, with the you have the scene with Cy and Am, and then she gets the muzzle because they sort of destroy the house. I should also mention I loved when they flipped over on their backs and were like, acting injured. I loved that little scene. I love the way they're animated. But yeah, she gets a muzzle, and then Lady ends up getting loose and going off with Tramp and having their day together. And you have the scene with the restaurant, Tony's restaurant, with the spaghetti dinner. This has like become one of the most iconic scenes for Disney. I don't think that when I was little, I don't think it ever stood out to me as anything too special.
I liked Tony and Joe. Like I remember I was like, I want them to come back in the movie because I thought they had a fun dynamic.
Oh, they had
Mhm.
a great dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably for me, the things that I liked the most were not to be too cliche, but all like the action scenes that Disney would have wanted. I think those are the things that stood out to me, and all the animals. Like I loved anything with the animals, so I loved the zoo. But
Hmm.
like obviously, it is a really well done scene with the spaghetti dinner.
Well, and even just how many times that scene has been replicated.
Yeah. Mhm. But I don't think I cared too much about it. I remember watching it as a kid and thinking that it seemed ridiculous that they would both end up slurping up the same noodle. It's like, how do they manage that?
Where's your romantic side?
I think this is another case where, as a kid, I thought too much about things. And then, of course, you get the scene with them like overlooking the town. I don't think I remembered like the place that they are. When it pulls back, you can see a whole bunch of cars around them. So this is supposed to be like a romantic overlook. I don't think that ever stood out to me as a kid. I didn't think anything of it, but I really liked that detail, having the cars like not like fully prominent, but like kind of in the shadows. As Lady and the
Uh-huh.
Tramp are looking over the town, you've got a bunch of other couples there as well.
Lovers lookout.
Yeah. And then, of course, the next day, when Lady is eventually caught by the dog catcher and she meets all the other dogs, you get the He's a Tramp song. I think that's the song that I most associate with this movie. Although, watch other than the Siamese Cat song, because I loved that song as a kid. I think I had the Siamese Cat song memorized as a kid. Watching it now, though, I really liked some of the songs at the beginning, like the opening song and like the lullaby. Those are really good. But the He's a Tramp song with Peg is probably the most iconic to me right now.
Well, and the ability to like animate Peg in a way where she's sultry and a dog.
Yeah,
Because you just got that, like that, not Mae West, but kind of that the ability to emote that sultry in a kid's movie, but done well.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I don't know how much of like obviously in some cases it can be a bit of a problem, but I feel like this is kind of a trope of movies at the time to have a whole bunch of animals as different stereotypes. And you've got like all of the different accented dogs in the pound.
Yeah.
Like obviously you can get into shaky ground when you end up with characters like Cy and Am, but I kind of liked some of these little guys.
Yeah, I think the problem isn't that in a sense they're stereotypes or that they all have different accents. I think to an extent it's how you utilize those stereotypes
Yeah.
and also like how you do kind of say these are probably white guys just trying to
Yeah, that
sound
too.
like so like to an extent you're kind of like okay like like if you watch like Oliver and Company you have the little chihuahua but he's
Mhm.
voiced
Yeah, Cheech
you know
Marin.
yeah so he's actually
Yeah.
voiced so like whilst he has stereotypes to him it's better to me at least I think
Yeah.
as obviously someone who's very knowledgeable about this. No, but like, I'm not going to be like, darn Lady and the Tramp, we should just destroy it. And I don't think anyone's really saying that anyways, you know?
No,
So
no.
like,
Of all the problematic movies from
yeah.
Disney's past, I think this is one of the least egregious ones. It just basically the Siamese Cat song is all that's like really stand out, glaring. Like, no,
Yeah.
this doesn't quite
Yeah.
work today.
Yeah, it's like, oh, but you probably could have thought that one through a bit more.
There's always a thing about context with any of this stuff, and I know that, like we said, or the Siamese Cat song is not the worst example of that. But I don't know if you guys had this, but on Disney Plus, watching it, they had a black screen up front that talked
Yeah.
about things at the time, and Warner Brothers did that too, with a lot
Hmm.
of their classics,
Yeah.
as compared to editing them down, which thank God. But
Yeah. No, I collect the Looney Tunes, like the gold collection.
mhm.
I don't think it was in all of them, but there was at least one of those collections that had like a bunch of the worst examples. They had a whole segment with Whoopi Goldberg talking about it would be wrong to try and erase the past, so we're not going to censor these cartoons, something like that. It's been a
Mm.
Right.
while since I watched it, which I much prefer that than just take the Song of the South route and hide it forever and no one can see that we did this thing.
Right. Because the thing is, even if you were to try to erase it, there will be something that survives in 95% of cases. Like
Yeah.
you look at all the lost media across history, and not to say there's not a ton of it because there is, but a lot of that stuff does survive through like a random dub or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
Mhm.
People will talk about it.
Yeah.
And the more you hold it under, the more
Yes.
people want to know because curiosity grows with time and
It's
yeah.
probably not exactly the same, but they, for at least like for celebrities and stuff, when they try and hide something, they call it the Barbara Streisand effect because I think somebody took like an aerial photograph and her home was included and she like tried to sue to get them to hide the photograph and it just kind of blew up and like everybody started sharing this photograph.
Well, God, look at the Royals with the whole cancer thing with
Oh
Kate
yeah.
Middleton,
Yeah.
and not to say that they've never not been very secretive, but putting out a photoshopped version of your family is not going to help.
No. It's better just to like not that stepping away from like health issues, like for something movie related, it's better just to own the past instead of trying to hide it because it's going to get out either way.
Yeah. And health stuff, you can keep it real simple and leave it at that. It's because people won't stop asking.
Hmm.
The biggest mysteries are because people keep digging because there's not some kind of answer.
Yeah. Not that my opinion means anything to the Royals, but like all they would have needed to say is she's having some health issues and we'll talk about it when she's ready. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, that's a really weird tangent. I
It is.
apologize.
Yeah, getting back to the Lady and the Tramp.
Yes. Is that what we were talking about?
I thought it was kind of interesting that they had like they didn't really tell. This is another thing where they showed, not told, with the dog that got put down. Like I thought it was interesting that they had something like that, and I think it's probably to set up the danger to Tramp in the end. But I thought it was interesting that they would put something like that, something as dark as that, in a movie. Not that
Mm.
Disney shied away from dark things, but I don't know. It just seemed a little darker than he would normally go.
Yeah. Poor Nutsy.
Yeah, R.I.P.
Justice for Nutsy. Join my campaign.
I think it's a little late now.
No, Nutsy.
I'm sorry. I always remember, and this is again, sorry, slightly tangenting, but closer in than the Royals. Like you look at the Dumbo movie, like
Hmm.
one when his mom is kind of, I guess incarcerated for lack of a better term, and there's that whole scene, or when he goes and gets drunk, and like all of
Yeah.
the, oh my God, that scared the crap out of me as a kid.
It's weird that everybody says that that was terrifying. I thought it was fascinating as a kid.
Oh, it was fascinating, but it was still freaky as hell.
I think just different things scared me as kids. I never got scared by the things that scare most kids. Which will there's something in this movie that scared the crap out of me as a kid, which we will get to. I'm sure you can figure out what it is. The only really scary thing in the movie.
Yeah, that left that giant plate of spaghetti and meatballs and the fear that I wouldn't be able to eat it all.
How
Sure.
about that lady didn't eat the last meatball even though Tramp pushed it over to her?
I know. Talk about wasteful.
He's like, "Here, I'll share my affection," and she's just like, "I don't want your meatball."
No, you know what was the scariest part of this movie? It's something that's outside this movie. It's like in that one kind of like really wild looking dog in the sequel when oh God, does Scamp goes to the dog shelter, the
Yeah.
dog
Yeah.
pound, and there's that one dog with like the crazy eyes.
Oh yeah.
I watched that one first, so that impacted me all the way through watching the original, which I watched last.
I did the same thing. I wanted to save the best for last.
Yes.
I wanted to start with the worst one.
I think that I did not to lay my cards too early, but I think the sequel and the remake are kind of in the same boat on that one. Like comparing rotten pears to rotten oranges.
I think the scariest part of the movie is that there were two more to watch. Like, not that I didn't enjoy watching the original, but it was like, that was a good time. Oh, wait, there's more. Because I watched them in release order. So
I'm so sorry, Katie.
I wasn't clever.
I just watched them that way because I knew, like, because time was kind of tight. So I knew the original. I figured I hadn't seen either of the other two, so I needed to get those done.
See, I'd seen the sequel, so I knew what I was getting into.
I
Kind of.
Anyways, back to the pound.
Tangent over.
Eventually, Lady is claimed. Aunt Sarah comes, gets her, and chains her in the backyard. And you have the scene with Jock and Trusty coming to, I guess, propose marriage to her. And this is one of those scenes that I feel like people nowadays are trying to read more into it than was intended. Because I remember a while back reading that the reason that they did this is because Lady got pregnant and they need to make sure that she's kept respectable.
Oh God.
And when
What?
I read that a while back, and like I've seen it multiple times online, like that this is the adult meanings hidden in your favorite Disney movies. And I hadn't watched Lady and the Tramp in years. So not that I accepted it that somebody said that, but I was like, I'll watch it and see if I can get that from the scene. And I watched it. I was like, they are reading way too much into this.
You mean things like Watch Mojo read too much into that stuff? Come on, that's crazy.
They basically,
when has that ever happened?
I think they just think Lady got abandoned by her owners, and they are trying to give her a home away from Aunt Sarah.
Also true.
I think that's the point of this scene. It is kind of weird that they decide to propose marriage to her. Like, I don't know how their owners would feel about them bringing in a new wife. But I think that's what the scene was. I don't think it was Lady is secretly pregnant.
My God. And I understand the 50s was quite a long time ago, but that what? Yeah. Anyway.
I think if they had meant that to be the meaning of that scene, they would have made it more obvious to the adults. Because when I read that, I was like, okay, well, they must have phrased it in some way that I would not have understood as a kid, but I would understand as an adult. Watching it now, it's like, no, there is no line in here that gives you any indication that that's what's happening.
Right. I mean, you kind of do get, and I guess as an adult in 2024, looking back at a movie from 1955, you could take the kind of aftermath of their Italian dinner as like a romantic interlude. It leads to other things, but even still,
I think that's what they're doing. They're seeing two pieces of a puzzle and drawing their own picture in between them.
Oh, agreed. Repeat to yourself, it's just a show. You should really just relax. MST3K mantra early and often is my prescription for those folks.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, during the scene, Tramp arrives and they turn their backs on him. He's not wanted here. And then you get what was the most horrifying scene to me as a child. This huge rat sneaking into the house. I don't know what it is about this rat because it's not that scary now, but as a kid, that thing was horrifying. Different things scare different children, and I was terrified of this rat. It was the most creepy looking thing.
I mean, it's big, it's shadowy, and it's got beady red eyes and like an evil grin, and then it tries to attack a baby. So I can see why
Yeah.
you could be scared of that.
But I also love that it made like little squeaky duck noises.
Okay, was the rat scarier than Aunt Sarah saying, "Ah, a rat"?
The rat was scarier. I was terrified of that thing. But it did its job because they really wanted to amp up the stakes for the end of this movie, and they did a really good job with this rat.
And I know that we're not at a time and place in the history of animation where they're going to end with a big boss battle, but the simplicity of this, in the grand scheme of things, it's very small, but it is significant and
Yeah.
so well done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
the way they lit it because, like, this is at night. I think it's raining, and she calls Tramp to go in after this rat because she's chained up. And the way they light this fight, having it like mostly dark, but you see his teeth flashing as he's barking and trying to bite the rat. I thought that was really well done.
Very. Do you think and I guess I can kind of hear it, but do you think it was the actual people doing the dog barks? Because you can hear the voice in the barks, like for Tramp and.
It might have been a combination
Yeah.
because I feel like in some cases it was too real, unless somebody's like really good at making a dog bark, because we'll get to it in the next movie. But
No,
not
you're laying
everyone.
down a lot of expectations for the next movie. I'm assuming the sequel is like next level.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
It's A level.
No, not everybody is Frank Welker.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do good animal noises. So I don't know whether they supplemented real noises or not, but I feel like for a lot of it, they used real dog noises. I think they might have mixed a little bit, but I think a lot of, at least for this one, was real noises, real animals. Except for the rat. The rat was made with a squeaky duck toy. Something like that. Yeah, he kills the rat, but during the fight, the crib gets overturned. The baby's crying. Aunt Sarah comes to see what's going on, and like, I can't fault Aunt Sarah for thinking that the dog has done something terrible, because it really, without seeing the rat, that's what it looks like. So yeah, I can't, even though she's not the nicest person, I can't really fault her here.
Yeah, like a thing I like about the original is while you have quote unquote the bad people, they're never showcased as just like evil, conniving,
Yes.
horrible people. They're just kind of like, oh, you can tell that Aunt Sarah is not a dog person.
Yes. There's a lot more nuance.
Right.
Yeah, she doesn't know how to handle a dog.
Yeah.
So is Aunt Sarah John?
Hopefully not, but
But even the dog catcher isn't the worst person in the world because, like, he takes the steps to find where Lady actually comes from and stuff like that. He's not like, haha, another notch on my belt of capturing evil, terrible, dirty strays or anything like that. Like, while in the eyes of the dogs, he's not a good person, he's not showcased as, like, an evil person.
Mhm.
Right.
Even though like they still have the whole one-way door and stuff, and that's a terrible thing, but like in an essence the person himself isn't a terrible person.
Yeah. But yeah, she calls the dog catcher. Tramp gets taken away, and Jim, Dear, and Darling come home at that moment. The dog catcher says something about the dog attacking a baby. So they run in to see what happened. And Lady is now free. She immediately goes to show them this dead rat, and they figure out what's going on. And I like the scene with Jock and Trusty. Like, they assume the worst about Tramp, and then as soon as they hear about the rat, they're like, we misjudged him. And then they go and try and make things right.
That is a very dog thing to do because, like, sometimes my dogs will be like, "Who are you? Who are you?" And I'll be like, "It's just me coming home." And they'll be like, "Oh, we're so sorry. We're the worst. We're so
We
sorry
love
we barked at
you.
you. I'm sorry." And you're like, "You're fine." But like, they'll immediately be like, "You are intruder. We hate you." And they're like, "Oh no, we're so sorry. We misjudged you."
And they do the whole, have you guys ever seen, I'm sorry, slightly random tangent. Have you ever seen like they do the text messages between the human and their dog?
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, oh hey, I'm gonna be home later. Why? What, you ever coming home? Yeah, I'm just getting dog food. But are you getting another dog? Like that whole, they're hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you've got the chase between Jock and Trusty and the dog catcher, with Trusty trying to use his nose, finding the trail. And then he ends up getting injured when they cause the crash. And I couldn't remember. I thought I read somewhere that the original plan was for him to die in the wreck, but I don't know if that's true or not, because I could be getting that mixed up with the Fox and the Hound, because the original plan was to have Chief die. So I don't know if I just mixed up two fun facts.
Fun facts.
Like
Small things, really.
You think dog death is funny, do you?
I
You
didn't
Yeah, it
terrible
was
cat
freaking
person.
hilarious, man.
I didn't see it in my research this time, so I'm not sure if that was originally the plan or not. But yeah, they do end up saving Tramp, and he is adopted by Jim Dare and Darling. And then you've got the scene at the end with Christmas time. Tramp is now part of the family, and they have puppies, and Jock and Trusty are visiting. And I liked the scene between Trusty and the puppies, with him telling a story, because you've had Trusty trying to tell a story through various scenes in this, and he reminded me of a lot of old people that I've known throughout my life, telling the same story over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the detail with the puppies. Now he has a new audience for the story, and then he completely forgets what he was going to say. I also liked the scene where Jim Deere is trying to take everybody's picture, and he uses too much flash powder in the camera. And I don't know why the way they animated the baby and the puppies kind of like freezing and looking at this big flash. The expression on the baby's face cracked me up. And that's basically the end. You have the scene around the Christmas tree, and the music comes back in. Like I said, it's really simple, but they do it so well. I really like it.
Yeah. And sometimes the best stories, and it goes without saying, but the best stories handle the simple stuff well, and they tell a full story.
Yeah, I hadn't remembered how simple the story was, because watching movies nowadays, that there's like so many details, and you've got surprise twists and secret villains and all these things. But I don't know, there's something about the way that Disney used to do things. Not that they always did it the same way, but like in a lot of the movies, it was a very basic story, and it was like the way they told it and the art surrounding it that made it so memorable and so good. And this is just a prime example of that.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, just and like having watched the sequel, the remake, and then this last, there's that thing about letting things breathe. And I don't remember which song it was from the sequel, but I remember thinking that it doesn't give the time to breathe and let you take in what's going on.
Yeah.
You mean all the songs from the sequel?
No, there was one there was one in particular that stood out, but yeah, none of the songs really gave time to kind of, it's like, oh, we need to put a song in here. Da 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 da. Okay, on to the next.
Was it was it the one about like the family where it's like all three of them singing at the same time?
I feel like that or the Siamese song. I don't remember which, but either way, yeah, we'll talk about that in a few.
No, the music, like there were more songs in this that I remembered, but the music was never the focus. It was just like something that was added on to build a better scene, if that makes sense. It was never like, this is a musical, we need to have a song here, everybody needs to break out in a song. It's usually just like background singers, just kind of setting an ambiance to the scene. And I really liked that.
Well, it's kind of like the Blues Brothers. It's a movie with music in it, but it's not a musical.
I kind of, not that I prefer that, but for something like this, I do prefer it in instances where you're telling a story like this, because not everything needs to be a musical, but the music
Mhm.
does help set the scene. And I really like the way Lady and the Tramp handled that. Yeah, that's Lady and the Tramp. I haven't really fully made out like a ranking of all the Disney movies. I know a lot of Disney fans like to do that. I figure I'll wait and do that at the end, but I feel like this has to be somewhat near the top. It's at least in the top half of them for me, because this is
Oh,
one
yeah.
I watched a lot as a kid, and well, having watched some of Disney's recent outputs, this
Cough, cough, wish, cough, cough.
not to name any names, but this is so much better than some recent attempts by the studio.
Well,
That
define attempts.
so I just Lady and the Tramp is just it's a classic for a reason, and
Yeah.
it's so good. High recommendation for just a chill movie to put on for a fun movie night.
Yep.
Hmm.
It doesn't have high stakes, but it is enjoyable because you know that there was so much put into it.
Yeah. It's one of those where it's the artist trying to make a work of art for the sake of art. Like even the way that it started with Joe Grant coming up with this idea, a movie inspired by his dog. I feel like that in itself is better than how well, I don't want to jump ahead to like the sequel, but it's like we need a
What?
sequel. We got to come up with a story. Like what are we going to say? This came up
Oh, there's
organically.
plenty to say.
Everything seemed to come together so organically. It just worked. Whereas when you come up with, and I, I don't want to like just rag on the sequel, but like it's a money grab basically. They wanted something they could sell on a DVD, so they built a sequel out of something that didn't need a sequel. It's just it works so much better when it's an organic idea that a whole bunch of artists care about and flesh out into basically a work of art. Well, I guess that will be all for Lady and the Tramp, the original.
Yes. The original and the best.
Yes.
The
Not
only movie.
spoiler alert, but yes. So yeah, like I said, I watched this one first because I was I wanted to save the best for last. Had you guys seen this before this time?
I feel like maybe because my nieces had all the sequels just because they were in that age. I feel like might have seen the sequels with them like at one point, but it was more like background noise by and large.
Hmm. I think I watched this once because I vaguely remember when it came out. I would have been early teens. And like if Disney came out with a new movie, we borrowed it from the library at least once. So I know I've seen this at least once, but I had forgotten the entire thing. I did not remember what this movie was about. I didn't remember any of the characters, nothing. I know I saw it, but nothing stuck with me at all.
Yeah, I remember I had seen it as a kid. I think I rented it a couple years after it came out. Because I think I remember it too well for when it came out. I mean, it's seen it then, but I remember scenes more based off of on one of my VHSs. It had a trailer on that for this movie, and I saw that more often. And so it was really strange because it's one of those trailers where they have lines of dialogue playing over scenes that aren't where the dialogue goes, but they kind of lip sync to the dialogue. So I'm watching the movie and it's weird because the dialogue's not coming out at the right scene from my memory of this trailer. And I'm like, this is trippy and weird. But I didn't like it back then, and I think I had good tastes.
So you're saying it hasn't gotten better with age?
No, it's got maybe worse
That's fair.
because I was reminded what Scamp sounded like.
I will also say I haven't like I guess when my nieces were young, they watched a lot of the sequels to the original Disney pieces.
Hmm.
And like with Little Mermaid and pieces like that, there wasn't that much difference between like the original piece and the art style of the remake or the sequel. But with this being you're talking a good 40 years in most cases, you know, to at least the mid to late 90s.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to see them like try and match that pattern.
Yeah. there's such a huge difference in art style, and this is also something I thought of when I watched Bambi 2
Hmm.
for the podcast. It's such a huge departure. It's so long since the original. I mean, not only does it not need to be made, but the art style just can't be the same because they're using completely different tools.
Well, and the talent is different too. You're talking about
Yes.
folks that, obviously if you're an artist, you can adapt your style, but to try and match for someone that was drawing that specific way for however long that they did it and ask someone else to come in and copy that style. And Katie, I'm sure you can attest to this.
Hmm.
It takes time and it's not as simple as people would go, oh, well, just, draw it like this.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much, again, IMDb, some of the trivia you can trust, but others, I don't know. According to what I saw in the trivia for this, the model for Scrappy Doo from Scooby Doo and Scamp were based off the same model.
What?
Again, I don't necessarily think they were. They are similar in nature, but you could
Yeah.
say that about a lot of stuff. I mean, I highly doubt it, but it just the kind of characters that they are, it kind of is a fun little thing.
Scampy Doo.
I feel like he's more just kind of his model would have been Tramp, but he
Oh
just has a
yeah,
bigger head. Scrappy Doo has a much bigger head even than either of them, so
also
Yeah.
true.
he's like 50% head.
That's a hell of a thing to have a strong neck to hold up. Can you imagine the neck muscles on that? No wonder he's so crabby all the time.
Oh gosh,
I
I
mean,
don't
he
want
does have
to.
a pretty thick neck. I don't think it really stuck out. Well, obviously, I wouldn't have known anybody as a kid, but like there was kind of a lot of big names in this, like far more than there needed to be.
Yeah.
I feel like Disney was, there wasn't really even a poster to put these names on because it's not like this is going to a theater. They're putting this out on DVD. It's like, why do you need to get all of these huge names? Like, I mean, somebody like Jodie Benson, I guess it makes sense. She's kind of Disney royalty, so get somebody like that. But like Scott Wolf and Alyssa Milano, why do they need to be the main characters of this movie? I don't know.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's like, oh, we know a guy who knows a guy and we can get this person in your movie or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It was weird when I saw the names of some of the people in here. Like even if I'm not super familiar, because like and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but like I know the name Chaz Palminteri, who
Oh yeah,
played
he
the
was
Rottweiler.
so he plays a lot of like kind of gangster-esque like Italian guys, so like untouchable type guys, Goodfellas, those kinds of like very tough characters.
Okay, so he was typecast then.
Oh yeah. No, and that's always what he played. It's like, how Robert De Niro always plays like an Italian or, Al Pacino. Like they always play like that guy.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
Baba Goosh, that guy. Yeah, that's essentially I don't know why. They're like the I'm walking here kind of guy, that whole
Yeah.
but definitely he was typecast for that role. He's known for playing like the kind of tough guy. So
Hmm. I think the one that surprised me the most was Mickey Rooney played the Irish Wolfhound, which was just such a weird, like, why Mickey Rooney?
because he needs to pay his rent.
I mean, that's why any of them are here, probably.
Yeah, I will tell
Probably.
you this, and this is like this is very like low budget movie thing, but there's this horror movie called Silent Night, Deadly Night. And there are five of them. And there should not be five of them. But in the fifth one, I think it's either Mickey or Andy Rooney. I don't remember which. One of them plays a toy maker, and this same person 2 movies back basically said that this series of movies was like the worst thing ever. And then 2 movies later, he ends up in as a major character in this movie. So,
Did the filmmakers do this on purpose? Like they heard somebody dissing their movie and were like, I'll show you. You're going to be in it and you're going to like it.
it is highly possible. I cannot say that for sure, but I guarantee you that he was eating just a little bit of crow at that point. He either needed to make a house payment or it was easy money or something. But
Probably. I think that's probably why you get, not that Mickey Rooney is like a D-list actor, but like he would have been like in his 90s at this point, I think.
oh yeah.
So they usually, these types of movies try and get as big a name as they can. I feel like they target the people who might be a little bit more desperate. Not that
Oh,
Mickey Rooney is
100%.
desperate or anything, but I don't know.
Well,
I feel like that's who they go after.
look at Ernest Borgnine and was it Tim Conway that played Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy and SpongeBob? Like
Yeah,
that
but
was a
those are iconic
reoccurring,
characters,
right? But at that time they wouldn't have been. I mean, who would
I
who knows?
suppose.
Amongst a certain subsect of the population, maybe Scramp, uh, yeah, what was that?
Yeah.
Scamp.
I like his name better. His name is Scram now.
Who's to say that Scamp isn't like an iconic character worthy of his own, franchise?
No, please.
Although apparently he was like the story basis for his whole thing. Like there was a set of Disney comics that
Yeah,
kind of go into his story.
that probably is why they chose to focus this on him. Not that they had any grand ideas of like, oh, we're going to dive into Disney history and bring back a long forgotten beloved character. No, they just wanted to make a sequel that had name recognition. But it is interesting that they did choose the character that Disney had originally given a comic series to.
Yeah. On that note, like the first like 15 minutes, well, 10 minutes of this thing, if you wanted to check off every major character and place from the original, they basically go through and show you everything
Yeah.
in that first 10 minutes.
Yeah, the way this opened was as soon as it started, as soon as this chorus started singing, I was just shaking my head. I was like, this is such a downgrade. Even though I watched this first, like I had remembered enough from watching the original so many times as a kid that this is such an obvious downgrade. I
Mhm.
don't think
Yeah.
watching this when I did back then, I would have recognized this as the downgrade because I hadn't watched enough movies to notice things. But
Well, that and it was built for a kid. Like this was
yes, yeah.
tailored for a kid audience. It wasn't. I mean, we can scrutinize anything,
Hmm.
and you still need to hold the task kids movies on a certain amount of levels. But
Yeah,
it does require a little bit different take than what you're going to do with the normal movie.
yeah,
And I'm not disagreeing with you on anything so far. I'm just saying on that front.
yeah. No, that's kind of the whole problem with these movies is that they're built for kids and only kids. Like they are trying to sell a DVD to parents who just want to buy their kids a movie and keep them quiet. The way that Disney made and still tries to do their movies is something that will appeal to the entire family, be as entertaining for the 3-year-old as it is for the 40-year-old. But that is not this movie.
No.
This movie was aimed at 6-year-olds and probably not too many other people.
Hey, John, the Wish was also not meant for anybody outside of anyone above the age of 6.
I think they tried to make it, but
Um,
they didn't quite get there.
yeah, and that's disrespectful to 6-year-olds. They have better taste.
That is a good point.
I will say though, Wish had a couple of songs that I liked. This had no songs that were even remotely memorable. Even though I watched this morning, nothing stuck with me.
Yeah, like the songs, they didn't flow well, is just all I can say. Like, I don't understand. I don't know understand songwriting. I don't write songs or anything, but like just the way they were written, like they were so uncatchy and so
Out of
just
place.
out of
Yeah.
place, and the characters are just saying words for
I think
whatever reason that didn't like stick.
part of it is that it is following up a movie that was not a musical. The original did have songs. Occasionally, those songs were sung by characters on screen, but that was not part of that world. Like, if you're going to have a musical and everybody breaks into song, fine. That's part of this world. I can suspend my disbelief. For this, you're coming off of Lady and the Tramp, where that wasn't the norm for the world, even though you had a couple songs that some characters did sing. This is like they were making a musical, and this did not need to be musical, and all the characters did not need to break into song. They didn't need to interrupt the action with a song. They didn't need to explain action with a song. It felt so weird in this movie.
But Jonathan, if you put a song in the movie, then you don't have to show the characters' motivations. You can just tell them.
Yeah, I think that's what they were trying to do.
Plus, kids love music, right? Right?
Sometimes. But like, I mean, I was early teenage, so I wasn't like a small child. This did not stick with me, and I bet if I asked any of my brothers, they would have also completely forgotten about this movie, and none of the music would have stuck with them either.
Yeah, no, nothing really sticks with you.
I
Agreed.
will say that as I was watching, like I was like two or three songs in, I was like, this is terrible. Who wrote this? And I had to look it up because I was like, there's no way they got actual professional songwriters, but they did. I was shocked when I found out who wrote the songs. Not that I recognized them, but the music was by Melissa Manchester and Norman Gimbel. Norman Gimbel has been working with Disney for decades and decades. Like he's passed on now, but like he wrote "A Whale of a Tale" for the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is an iconic Disney song.
Maybe he was having an off year.
Maybe Melissa Manchester also is long career. She wrote music for The Great Mouse Detective. She voiced the singer Mouse in the bar scene. She was famous enough that she was a featured guest on The Muppet Show in 1980.
Wow.
So I feel like they should have done a better job. Sorry, but they were not on the top of their game for this movie.
It's like when John Williams writes a song and like everyone wants him to score their movie, and sometimes you're like, oh, this one just sounds like all this other music. You're just like, okay, this one I doing for rent, not for passion.
I was just going to say, maybe this is like Mickey Rooney voicing a random dog. They just needed the paycheck.
Yeah.
It could also be a matter of timing. They're like, okay, you have a week to write, 12 new songs and the score, and it better be
Yeah.
catchy.
That's true also. Because I don't know how long it took to make this movie, but I can bet they didn't spend decades on it like they did for the original.
Oh, definitely
Yeah.
not. And the thing is, like, it feels, just looking at the way this was done, you can kind of see, like, oh, well, you've got like the Don Knotts inspired dog catcher, and you've got like the Reggie dog was kind of based off Cujo. There's a lot of referential stuff, so you're not creating everything from scratch. You've got like your basic palette, and sometimes it's used well, and in this case, it's not used well at all.
No. I For a lot of things, even I don't want to say like the worst movies, like because even I don't know why we keep bringing up Wish, but like even with Wish, there were scenes I enjoyed in Wish. It had its moments that I liked. It had moments that did stick with me past the movie that I would watch again. I cannot think, even though I watched this morning, I cannot think of a single scene that fully stuck with me as enjoyable. It was just kind of a chore to get through this movie. I hate to sound so horribly negative, but like they really kind of just phoned this one in, which I guess is the legacy of most of the Disney sequels that they made for the direct-to-video line.
Yeah.
But this, they really phoned this one in.
I mean, I don't know about you, but every time that Scamp said yep whenever he was barking, I don't know what he was doing, but he said yep like 90% of his lines. I was filled with joy and happiness because it sounded like a dog. Every time they barked or yipped or whatever they were supposed to be saying, it was so good. They sounded so much like a dog. And then you have Frank Welker come in and he's like, hello, I am actual dog noises. And you're like, well, now that just made everyone sound worse.
I was just kind of annoyed every time you would have a person pretending
No,
to
yeah.
bark.
No, it was bad.
It was so bad. Like, I feel like Scamp was the worst, but like nobody did a
Yeah.
very good job barking other than
No.
Frank Welker.
They could have done dog barking classes if they had really wanted to.
Or just get Frank Welker to do all the barking.
Oh yeah, and
Or
Modulus
just
in
the
the
porking
studio.
dogs.
Yeah,
I feel like that's even cheaper.
that is true. I would also like I think this one and well, I guess it would have come out a little bit different. But Little Mermaid's Tale, they kind of follow the kids of our main protagonists from their original movies.
Mhm.
They're essentially doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's probably been just as long as I've seen Little Mermaid too, but I think you're right. It's so lazy.
Yeah.
Like, and as I was watching this, I was like trying to figure out what the point of the story was,
Money.
other than money. I was like, not that it's exactly the same, but it reminds me of movies that I watched, like movies that would have been in our church library. Like they're trying to teach you a lesson. Like, because like I don't know if you watched any like I don't know, just Christian media as a kid, but like McGee and Me or anything from Focus on the Family. Every story had to be a lesson, like very heavy-handed. Like there is no nuance at all. It's like
Right.
this is this, and this is why this is good, and this is why this is bad. That's what this felt like. Like the whole point of it was Scamp doesn't like what his parents say, so he runs away from home and finds out the hard way that that the world is a mean place. That's
I would
that
definitely
it
agree.
felt like stereotypical bad Christian media.
Well, what was weird about this movie is like, in a sense, you could say that the original Lady and the Tramp did have a bit of like questions and like themes around class with the dogs because you had like
Yeah.
the rich dogs and then stuff. This felt like they decided to really go with that, and they're like, but they treated it as if being a street dog was like alcoholism or something.
I didn't
Because
even
like
think of that, but you might be right.
because like Tramp is like, I will never tell my son I lived on the streets, and like he's
That's
like, I'm
true.
different now, I've changed. And
That
it's
is
like,
true.
it was like, what is this? Why is he treating it like this is a bad thing that he was like addicted to or something? And now he's like, oh, I'm free from that life now or whatever. It was so weird.
Now that you say it, yeah, even like the tests that Scamp goes through, he's like, "Oh, I'm just one more test, and I could be a contender." You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of like, oh, you're joining a street gang. Cool.
I think that also kind of ties in with how I was feeling about the movie, like the heavy-handedness of it. Like even
Mm-hmm.
though I didn't pick up on the alcoholism potential theme, it kind of fits with trying to sell a moral in a way that doesn't allow for any sort of nuance.
Yeah. It's weird though because it's not like it was like alcoholism or whatever. It's not like
Yeah.
all the dogs were getting high or whatever. But like it felt strange that suddenly it was like I thought to an extent it was kind of like don't judge the street dogs is kind of a little bit what Trusty and Jock learned. I mean, like they're just dogs is what it felt like in the original one. But then in the sequel, it was like, no, street dogs are bad. You need to be part of a loving American home.
Which isn't that weird though, too, because they know what happened with the tramp.
Yeah.
Like they lived it. They saw that all that stuff. There was, yeah, it totally lacks any nuance at all.
It's just strange because like the way they word it, like Tramp's just like, I changed. I found out what a real true life is like. And you're like, no, you found the life you wanted to live, not like the right way to live or whatever. Like, I don't know. It felt weird. They were just like shaming the other dogs, like, this isn't the way to live. You're supposed to live with your wife and you're supposed to live in your penthouse and just enjoy life and be rich. And you shouldn't like want to go and like travel or whatever, but then they kind of were like, oh, we can walk in the park sometimes. You're like, this just sounds, again, if it's like alcoholism, it's just like, okay, we can have a wine every so often, but just don't have it like all the time. And it's like, okay, what is going on? It felt like we could dabble in a pastime that maybe we shouldn't do all the time. It's like, it's just a walk. What are we doing? It was just weird.
You want to go run in the backyard and possibly get dirty? Gasp. Well, and even with Scamp, like the just the way that he's like, oh, well, I want to get dirty and I want to eat out of trash cans and all of that stuff. It's just like,
Yeah.
and that is totally like a kid thing. Like if you're held on too short of a leash, no
Hmm.
pun intended, you definitely get that. But I feel like, you know what, if father and son had taken 2 seconds to communicate,
That's what I was thinking through this whole thing. I was like, why aren't you actually just telling him why this is a problem? Because he wouldn't
Because
even talk about the fact that he used to live on the streets.
because it's a horrible addiction he had. Being on the streets, he was addicted to the street life.
he got soft, man. He got soft.
I think this is a problem I have with a lot of movies like this, where somebody just doesn't say something, and like the fact that they withhold this like one piece of information, if they had told it, the entire movie couldn't happen. So
Yeah.
it's like, well, we got to make it a secret because we need this thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make sense.
Because men can't talk about their feelings.
That's right. I mean, it was 2001. It was a long time ago.
What stays on the streets?
Yep.
I'm sorry, what goes on the streets stays on the streets. You talk about it in your loving family home with your full bowls of food. You're expected to eat all your food. Oh, the horror.
One thing I thought was interesting, and slightly away from like overall themes, they kind of give you context for timing on when this happens, like when this is set. And it kind of plays in because like Victorian times people like kept their feelings under the wraps, but it was like one of the newspapers was from 1911 and or yeah, 1911 talks about the Titanic.
Oh, really? I
Yeah,
missed that.
apparently. I just saw it in the trivia, so
Well, I probably was only half paying attention because I was so
oh,
bored. So
you call yourself a Disney podcaster, and I don't even know what to say, man. I'm disappointed.
I think in talking about these two movies, I figured out another thing that about this one of why it's such a downgrade. Because at its core, this is just as simple a story as the original. Because with the original, you basically have the story of lady is adopted, they have a baby, there's a bit of conflict, she has an adventure out in the world, she comes back, saves the day, the end. With this, you've
Mm-hmm.
got this dog, he's unhappy with his life, he runs away, he has an adventure, he finds a girlfriend, he comes back, they get adopted, or she gets adopted. That's it. It's a very simple story, but they throw in like all of these complications that really didn't need to be there. Like meeting the junkyard dogs and finding out that, oh, they actually knew Tramp in the past and this guy was, they were kind of friends. And now he's mad at Tramp for leaving the streets.
Okay, so the way he worded it almost sounded like they were like a couple or something. Because he's like,
It-
I gave him an ultimatum. It was me or her, and he left. I was like, I'm getting some romantic jealousy from this guy.
Again, I could have been a contender.
I, you're not wrong. Well, I mean, it's not, that's obviously not what was happening, but you're not wrong about that. But even that, no matter if it was like a couple or just best friends,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense either way because, well, first of all, you didn't even see this in the original movie. Like this is almost as egregious as the entire premise of Bambi 2 happening in the year between the scene where Bambi's mother gets shot and where he grows up. This is just inserting backstory into a movie we've already seen where none of this happened because you never saw him give Tramp an ultimatum or anything like that. Tramp lived on his own. Tramp was his own dog. He wasn't
Yep.
part of this pack. They've invented this whole thing, and they're just trying to tell you that this is what happened when there's nothing to indicate that anything like this happened in the original story of this dog's life. And I feel like they do that with so many of these direct-to-video sequels. They come up with an idea, and then you have to, if you're trying to make it work within the canon, you really have to jam it in between different scenes in a way that kind of, if you're trying to make it so that this is what actually happened, if you tried to cut it all together and make it work, it kind of ruins the original movie. I don't know. That's just, it annoys me when they try and, like, even, I've said before, Bambi 2 is one of the better ones. The way they did it makes no sense. but it has no need to exist. And the world would be a better place if it didn't exist, even though it's one of the least egregious ones in terms of storytelling and everything.
Hmm.
This, like, I'm not going to say, like, I don't feel like this should be canon because it almost kind of ruins the original because it's so dumb.
Tell us how you really feel.
I don't know. I feel like if they had really cared about the original story, they would have put work into making this something that worked with the original story and fleshed out the world and made it into something that can stand alongside the original and stand the test of time. Instead, this is basically a cheap cash grab made to capitalize on the name of the original that has very little to do with the original other than containing the same characters, and it just cheapened the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it killed me, and this is a very small thing, but when Scamp is talking about how he wants to go out and wants to be a garbage dog or a junkyard dog and
Garbage
all the
dog.
rest.
The
He
garbage
wa-
dog.
Guess what, Scamp? You don't have to go far because you're already a garbage dog.
Tramp the garbage dog.
Exactly. Like and Tramp goes to talk to him and such. Like Lady just stands there and does nothing. She doesn't try to, be like, oh, Scamp, blah 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 or anything like that. It's just she just stands there and watches.
Hmm.
I and not that she was necessarily the most vocal in the original, but hold her to that level. There was just no. It's like
Hmm.
everything was window dressing with the exception of Scamp and Angel.
Yeah. The characters were just off.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like the closest I can say to anything nice about the characters is that I thought Jodie Benson did an admirable job trying to capture the voice of Lady in the original. Like I could still tell it was Jodie Benson, but I thought she did a good enough job making it sound like she was actually Lady. But that's as close as I could get to saying something nice about the characters.
This movie was very anti wig wearing woman.
Yeah.
I feel if anything came close to actually making me laugh, it was that lady. Like I didn't actually laugh, but maybe I just sort of breathed out my nose a little bit heavier.
I will say that was one joke, at least with the first point, the first time it happened, they did follow it up, which I appreciated.
Uh-huh.
The lady gets her wig taken off and it goes into the river or something, and then later they think, oh no, it's Scamp, and they pull the wig out of the river, and it's like, oh, that's not Scamp.
Yeah.
Also, talking about this being a kids movie, when they're doing the junkyard dog song or the street dog song, and the one dog he's chewing on the you don't remember if it was a pillow or a couch or something, but he gets all the foam in his mouth or all the cotton in his mouth, and then talks about not getting distemper shots. It's like, what kid is gonna understand distemper? What the hell?
This was them trying to put in jokes for the adults.
Point, yeah.
They tried.
And you get some poor kid that he ends up trying to eat a couch, and the parents sue Disney because they're like, hey, my kid's trying to eat a couch based off of this movie.
I would hope that a child would not do that, but you never know.
There was also a random Willem scream.
Was there? I missed
Yeah,
it.
it was in the alley with Reggie right before that.
Okay. I
Or
missed
right
it.
after that. Oh, yeah. I hear a
I
William
must have been
scream.
too checked out.
Yeah, I can hear a Willem scream at like 50 paces, so one of my powers.
Normally I can too, but I guess I was off my game today.
Or at least it sounded like a Willem scream. It might have been like a variation on a scream like that, but it was in that realm of Willem-esque.
I mean, I would trust your Wilhelm scream radar better than I would trust my Wilhelm
Ah.
scream radar because I'm sure you've heard many more than I have.
Yeah, there's a lot of low budget movies that use those. So
Yeah, I don't really have much more to say about this movie. I feel like we've already explained the plot. There's not a whole lot to go through that's much deeper than anything we've said. It is a very simple movie. It's just they did not flesh it out in a way that made it feel worth it. Like this is not an artistic movie. Like Lady and the Tramp, like I said, it's a very simple movie, but the way they did it made it feel like a piece of art. This movie, while the animation was better than some cheap Disney animation, like the early direct-to-video sequels, it still didn't feel like a work of art. It was like they put the bare minimum effort in to make it look Disney-esque, but in a way that was only passable if you're just looking at it. Like once you start watching it, you realize there's not a whole lot of real artistic love put into this thing.
And sadly, I think you can say that about a lot of, not all, like post 2000s Disney stuff, but I think a good chunk of it, that they do suffer from that.
Yeah, even the theatrical ones, it is in that era of Disney's one of their dark ages, as some
Yeah.
people like to call them.
Decisions are made by accountants, not by the
Yes.
creatives.
Yeah. And I don't hit not to go off on a tangent, but I feel like history will eventually tell. I think we're in another Disney dark age. It's not like official or anything, but I don't know. One or two good ones here and there. Like I loved Encanto, but like the things around it is just like fine to borderline terrible.
I will say I really enjoyed Elementals, but I think it was a right place,
Oh,
right time
that's
kind of
Pixar. I
movie.
don't count Pixar.
Oh, that's
Like,
Pixar, right? I
yeah,
always get that screwed up. Okay, my apologies.
no, Elemental is a masterpiece. I loved
Yeah,
Elemental. I went to see it twice in the theater, and
nice.
these days it is rare for me to go see a movie twice. Like even if I really like it, I was like, I'll wait till get it on DVD. I went to see Elemental twice. It helped that I had people that wanted to see it. I was like, I'll go again. But oh, I loved Elemental. It was so good.
Like it's sad that that felt more like what you would want for a Disney 100-year thing than Wish. And I'm sorry,
Oh
we're going
yeah,
back to
yeah.
that again. I apologize. And one other thing, and then I swear I'll get off the Wish tangent, but I was talking to a friend of mine about Wish and how it had all the little Easter eggs from all the different Disney properties and such, or different movies. And they asked me what the one for Pinocchio was, and I couldn't remember it offhandedly. And they're like, well, as long as he didn't stare at a pile of poop in the middle of the street for a solid 15 minutes, we're doing okay.
That is an unfortunate bar.
I know. But it is a bar. So ideally speaking, it's both a form of measurement and a place where you can go to get drunk if it's not going to hit that bar.
I mean, we'll get there when we get to the next one, but I did not remember that there was also a poop joke in the Lady and the Tramp remake. And I was, as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, so I guess I can't blame Pinocchio for setting the bar this low because Lady and the Tramp did it first, unfortunately. It wasn't as blatant and horrible in Lady and the Tramp as the Pinocchio one, but it
I don't
was
think
still
much can
there.
beat I don't think much can beat the Pinocchio one. Ugh.
No. And I will say, I watched, obviously, this one came out before Pinocchio. And at the time that I watched the Lady and the Tramp remake, it was before Pinocchio. And I was still giving the movies the benefit of the doubt. I was far more charitable to them
You
than probably
fool.
I should have been. So now, having watched Pinocchio, going back to the Lady and the Tramp remake, I liked it a whole lot less than I did the first time I watched it. I was so annoyed by so many things. I was like, yeah, Pinocchio broke me.
Oh, Disney, you see what you've done to this sweet man? You should be ashamed of yourself. Go stand in the corner and make better stuff.
Look what you've done. You've given him anxiety.
Yes. I don't have words for you that will come up, not you, John, but Disney generally. How dare you?
The first time I watched this, I thought it was fine. I had a few issues, but like at that point, it was like the mediocre is okay because these never have been that great. Like very few of the Disney remakes have gone on to become a good movie in their own right. It's just kind of like an interesting reinterpretation in a different way of the story. So that's basically how I felt about this. And after watching Pinocchio, I feel like I'm looking at all of these far less charitably. I, I don't think I enjoyed much anything in this movie, which is kind of sad. Like even you've got Nicole Brown. I love her. Like she's in so many like little roles and things, and she's just fun, and she seems like a sweet, funny person. I'm always excited when she's in something. She's just cute and happy. And this was like, oh no, I don't like her at all in this movie. Which is not really her fault. It was the script. Like Aunt Sarah's not supposed to be a lovely person, but I don't know. Nobody really stood out to me as a character that I really liked. Like, I like some of the voices, like Tessa Thompson. I thought she did a good job as Lady. Like Sam Elliott has a great voice. He was Trusty, the Bloodhound. I love Ashley Jensen. She played Jock. They've made Jock a girl in this movie. I love Ashley Jensen. She was like one of my favorite characters. Did you guys ever watch Ugly Betty? It was like a
A
dramedy. It
few.
wasn't quite a sitcom on ABC several years. I loved that show. Ashley Jensen was one of my favorite characters. So anytime she shows up in something, I was like, oh, I love her. So I liked her. But beyond that, I didn't really care about anybody in this movie.
I have a definite bias towards the remake or the live action stuff just because, and especially when it comes to like anthropomorphic animals, what like Lion King could do as a cart or as an animated thing versus live action. You can't emote through a normal animal face.
Yeah.
And this one didn't suffer obviously as much as Lion King,
Hmm.
but I just the idea, and again, it goes back to the idea of cash grab, which I don't. In this particular case, I'm not sure if it's quite on the same level as the sequel,
Yeah.
but it just what part of the story did we not get with the original?
I don't know because this is so much longer than the original and it
And there's
just
no reason for it to be.
no. No, it was just like so many scenes it was like this is taking way too long.
Yeah, I kept looking at the runtime, like, and I was like, oh, okay, so we're to this point, so we should be about halfway through. You look at the thing, and it's like there's still an hour left. How is there
Yeah.
an hour left?
I don't know. They not that they added a ton of scenes. They did add a few scenes here and there, but it felt like they just stretched out the scenes that were from the original movie
Hmm.
to the point where it was like they're really just padding the runtime and it did not need to be padded. I
No,
feel like this not that any of the Disney movies need to be remade, but I feel like if they had made something on par with the length, trying to tell the same story, this could be a decent candidate for something like that. But instead of like trying to tell the same story, they changed a bunch of things. And not that that's even a bad thing, because like I've said before, if you're going to remake something, you don't need to make it a shot for shot remake,
no, nor should
but
you.
change it in a way that makes sense. And the changes that they made to this movie, probably to stretch out the runtime, did not make sense. But the whole thing with Aunt Sarah coming to watch Lady, like in the original, she's watching the baby and the dog. So it already is kind of so, for some people, yes, you want them to watch the dog. You want to make their precious baby needs to be safe. But like most people will just have somebody check on the house once in a while. Just feed the dog, make sure she's okay. Why did Aunt Sarah need to come and live at the house for however long?
Well, like it was just a day because she stayed overnight with, she hung out overnight with Tramp, and then the next day she went to the pound, like the next morning, and then she got picked up that same day. So they were gone for like maybe 24 hours.
Okay, that makes even less sense. I didn't even notice that. But if that's the case, that makes even less sense to have Aunt Sarah come and stay at the house just for Lady.
Yeah, because like the original, it made sense. The baby was there. They wanted someone to watch the baby while they went on a day trip because it still was about the same length, I'd say, because it's not like Lady was out there for days
Uh-huh.
with Tramp. And they didn't give you the implication that she was at the pound for days again. So, like, it's just like, okay, they went on a day trip without the baby, which is a completely fine thing to do and what couples like to do. They need someone to babysit the baby. That makes sense. Why do we need someone to babysit the dog? Why could the dog not come? Like, if the dog couldn't come, she has a nice big yard. It's not like
Hmm.
like does this family always have someone at home now?
Yeah.
You could say Darlene's always home, I guess, but like it just is strange that they have never had a situation where both of them are outside of the house
Hmm.
without Lady.
Yeah.
Well, and looking at it from a period time or time period perspective, not that dogs weren't considered family then, but you wouldn't have had the same implications that people
Mm-mm.
would today when it comes to animals,
No.
or
Yeah.
at least the majority of people.
Yeah. Most people wouldn't think twice about leaving a dog home for a day.
Right.
Probably more than one day. They just dump a bunch of extra food in the bowl and say they'll be fine.
Right.
It just, the fact that they took the baby with them made so much less sense.
Yeah.
And then it gets even weirder. Well, not that we need to go through the entire plot. We could we could just talk about the big changes. The cats. I'm not familiar with this breed of cat, the Devon Rex cat. I did think it was clever that they named the cats Devon and Rex because they're Devon Rex cats. So
Yeah.
I don't know what these cats are like. Their song was such a downgrade. Like, I know the original song is problematic these days. Just cut the scene. You don't need the scene.
Yeah.
Or just like write another catchy song or something. But like it just didn't have a flow. It's what I call, it had the feeling of what I call in Disney movies the Lin-Manuel Miranda alike, where they can't get him to come write a song, so they write a song that tries to attempt to do his music style. And it felt like they were trying to do it a bit.
Yeah. No.
Could be
Agreed.
correct. Because it did have a, like, it wasn't a Lin-Manuel Miranda song, but I could see that they could have been trying to, I don't know, imitate his flow or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, like not to bring up Wish for the 15th time, but like there's this, when all the animals are singing about being a star or whatever, there's this one character who throws in some bars that's just like this. It sounds like they're trying to do a Lin-Manuel Miranda thing, or maybe like David Diggs, who shows up in anime movies or stuff a lot, and he has his own kind of style of rapping. It felt like, oh, we couldn't get them, so we're gonna try to do a like to it, and it just doesn't hit the same because it's not them. And
Uh-huh.
they have perfected that craft and that way of singing, and then they're just like trying to copy it. And you're like, oh, there it is. The
So
Lin-Manuel Miranda.
it's a dollar store Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Because yeah, that song, like, if they had gotten, not that I would want Lin-Manuel Miranda to be a part of this, but if they had gotten him, I can imagine that whatever he would have come up with would have been memorable enough that it could have been passable for me. I know a lot of people don't like Lin-Manuel Miranda now for whatever reason, like he's played out or something. I like him a lot. I like the way he sounds. I like his flow, the way he writes music. There's something about it that I really like, and I feel like, not that I want him to be involved in this, but he could have done something better than whatever this was.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I on the subject of songs, some obviously they, like I said, they changed the lyrics and the cats for the Siamese one. They also with he's a tramp. They took out the fact that he's a ladies' man and made him a loner. It's
Yeah.
such a random change.
It felt weird.
I didn't even notice that, but yeah.
Are you worried that he's gonna like, oh well, he got lady pregnant again, that kind of a thing? I don't know. There's just bits like that it's nice that they're there because they do reflect our modern times, but if you were going to do the remake based on that kind of stuff, I just, and I know I don't think that it was based on that, but I don't know. It grand scheme, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we don't, little girl versus a little boy. The darlings have. That's awesome. That's great, but it doesn't change anything about the flow of the movie.
Yeah.
It's just a weird change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because then you didn't get that argument between Lady and Tramp where she feels like, oh, I thought I was something special, but I guess I was just another girl.
Right.
And he was like, no, you're not that. But no, it's like, oh no, you're just loyal to yourself. And he's just like, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. And she's just like, oh, okay. And you're like, oh, okay. The rats attacking the baby. Gotta go now. Like, oh no, the dog catcher's here again.
And even that, like, and I understand they were trying to make the dog catcher more of the villain, but I
I
don't
was
know,
so
it just
annoyed by
didn't.
that guy.
Yeah, they didn't add anything to him to make him malicious. It's like, oh, he's kind of a joke. And then, oh, well, he's not a joke. You didn't do anything to make that change in his character.
No, I
Yeah.
mean, in the original, the dog catcher was just sort of a background. Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't essential to the story, but this, he's like here from the beginning, stalking Tramp, trying to catch him, trying to catch all the dogs because that's his job. But like he's particularly obsessed with Tramp for some
Mhm.
reason. Like they really wanted a villain. Like this movie didn't
Yeah.
need a villain. We talked about it in the original. Like even Aunt Sarah's not a villain. She's just an overbearing
Yeah.
mother-in-law, but that type of a character. She's not a villain. She's just kind of antagonistic towards our main characters. But like this movie, they wanted a villain. They had to have a villain, so they decided to turn the dog catcher into basically a main character, which
Yeah.
made no
Like
sense.
they really amplified all the antagonistic characters to be even more evil.
Yeah.
Like,
I think we mentioned it when talking about the original Siamese cat song, but the cats destroy the house.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
absolutely wreck the entire house, which they didn't need to. Like the original, they broke a few things and made it seem like Lady attacked them, and that's all it
Hmm.
took. But this, they were like, we need these cats to be evil. They need to
Yeah.
absolutely ruin everything in this room.
And I think too that's them trying to talk to like, and I guess you could talk the quote shorter attention spans, all of that kind of stuff. Like you have to keep, action on screen at all times. Some of
Hmm.
that might have been based on that. If it's not bombastic, then it's not doing the job.
Yeah, I don't know. Another weird little change that I felt was not that it was huge or anything, but it just seemed really dumb. Was the interaction between Lady and the Tramp and the restaurant owner when they go to Tony's restaurant. The way he talks to them makes it seem like he's a crazy person. Like giving them a menu. Like this is more cartoony than the cartoon. like, like I just rolled my eyes when he put the menu in front of him. I was like, are you having a little game with yourself, pretending that
Didn't he
these
do that in
dogs
the
are
original though too?
Yeah.
if he did, they didn't make it seem in a way that made him seem crazy. Because like it's a cartoon, so I don't know, he's just a goofy guy in the cartoon.
I
But
do think one thing that helped in the cartoon is he was like, "Oh, here's the menu. What would you like?" And then Tramp barks like he's ordering something,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Okay." Instead, in this, he's just like, they're just like, "Oh yeah, he does this all the time." No, it's definitely because you're here, lady. Haha, what a crazy weird man. This is weird. He's talking to us like we're humans. And then you like have like the cutaway to guests in the restaurant, I guess, and they're like, they told us they were out of the special or
I
whatever.
actually
And you're
kind
like,
of liked that moment. I thought that was kind of cute.
no, it wasn't terrible. It kind of added to like,
the
oh, that guy's
weirdness.
kind of the weird, yeah, the weirdness going on.
Right. And what dog eats? I mean, if you're in that setting, what dog eats spaghetti?
Like, I think a dog will eat spaghetti if you lay it in front of it, but it's not like their
True.
choice of,
Dogs will eat anything.
True.
yeah.
We learned in the second movie that they'll eat all the trash from overturned garbage cans because that's all they have to eat.
Yeah. One other thing I did enjoy with this one was when they were trying to convince the one dog that when Lady is muzzled that she's got rabies and she's like rolling around and going rabies, rabies, ah, you got rabies on
That
yourself.
actually did crack me up, yes.
I thought that was really cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were moments that I did enjoy in this one, but not as much as the first time I watched it. Like I said,
No.
I think Pinocchio broke me.
No, it's fair. I think of the Disney live actions, this one is less offensive than most of them to
Yes.
me.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, again, it always just goes back to the fact that it wasn't needed. No, it
No.
didn't. It didn't add like say what you will about something like Aladdin, but it did try to tell a different take on the story. It wasn't
With
shot for shot.
Aladdin, it helps that Aladdin is a story outside of Disney.
True, that's very
So
true.
with stuff like Aladdin or Cinderella, I am at least for now, I am far more charitable to them than I am something like this because this is a Disney story. This is a Disney movie that they are remaking. But with like Aladdin or Cinderella, I just look at it as another adaptation of a classic story. And yeah, they can have little nods here and there to the original, but by and large, especially for like Cinderella or Aladdin, they are telling their own story, even if they include a song here and there from the original. they are still telling a different interpretation of a classic story. With this one, they only have the original movie to go on.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
it I don't know, it seems more egregious in a case like this. And I suppose like even with Pinocchio, Pinocchio is based on a book. So I feel like with what I've just said, I should be giving Pinocchio more grace. However, with Pinocchio,
No, do not give him more
not that we
grace.
need no, because all of the changes that they made, even when they aren't following the original story, they're not following the book either. Like I have read the book. The stuff they added to Pinocchio, the new version, the new Disney Pinocchio, is not from the book, is not from the original movie. They just did their own thing, which is far worse to me than just trying to make a new adaptation of Pinocchio.
One other random thing that, and I guess it bugged me because I really enjoyed this part of the original movie, but what did you guys think of the beaver statue thing?
I thought it was weird. Like they did the whole scene and it was like, oh, okay, well now they're going to go to the zoo and they're going to meet the animals. No, it's just a beaver statue. Uh, okay. Why?
I mean, it was certainly a creative way to incorporate the old and the new, but yeah, it just I was kind of because I hadn't seen this before, so I was kind of looking forward to what they were going to do, and they just kind of did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with scenes like that, I always love seeing different animals because, like, I love animals. I love the scenes like in the original with the zoo and seeing all the little animals that they go by. With this, it's just a statue. It seems like such a letdown. Not that I had any high hopes for the scene, but it's so boring compared to the original.
Yeah,
And like more outlandish somehow. Like you're like, oh, conveniently there is a beaver statue, and conveniently we can pop. Like, why did we have to use the beaver statue besides
Well,
it being a callback? Because it's
I
like we have to hook it between the teeth, and then I have to pull. But you could hook it on anything.
I feel like this is again, they are trying to do like they're trying to follow the movie. So
Yeah.
the none of this actually needed to happen. Like they stretched out the whole movie so much that they could have cut because all of this happens because of what happens with the cats. If you had cut the cats, just come up with another reason for Lady to go off on the adventure with Tramp. But because they felt the need to replace the cat scene with another cat scene and have Aunt Sarah think that Lady has destroyed the house, so she's got to have a muzzle, so she's got to go get the muzzle, and now Lady has to get the muzzle off. None of that was really needed. Like they could have had Aunt Sarah arrive and Lady feels abandoned, so she decides to go off with Tramp and have a little adventure while the her owners are gone.
right.
Like
And that would
none
have
of
given
the
it its
stuff,
own way too, in its
yeah,
own direction.
none of this was really needed. They just wanted to amp up the drama by having the cats and
Hmm.
then got to have the muzzle because that's a traumatic thing for her to go through. But like do your own thing instead of it's trying to do their own thing but also following too closely to the original.
Hmm.
And in doing their own thing but following the original, it's just a downgrade. Because,
Yeah,
like, instead of a fun interaction with the whistling beaver, there's a beaver statue. It's so boring.
Yeah, and the only reason why it happens is because of the original. Like it's not like
Yeah.
so it doesn't make sense within the universe. Like it's like,
No.
well, that doesn't make any logical sense, less so than going to the beaver and all that stuff.
Hmm. Yeah. Like, of all of the things that happen, like with this scene, not that you have to have everything follow beat by beat. I feel like the best scene that they followed closely was the pound, but only because of the song. I actually did
mm,
like the song in the pound, He's a Tramp. Did you have Janelle Monáe singing the song He's a Tramp? And I thought she did a great job. I thought it, not that you can beat the original or anything, but like if you're going to remake a song, I feel like she did it well. And I
yeah,
did enjoy that song a lot. I feel like obviously you kind of have to include that one. So I'm glad that they did, and I'm glad that they did it well instead of either rewriting it or phoning it in. Even though they rewrote a little bit of it that I didn't really notice. But yeah, you're right. It does change a little bit of the context with what she gets upset about later.
right. And like I say, it's a small thing, but it's not a. I guess it's not even the fact that they changed it. I mean, you kind of when you're writing that, you're gonna change things to kind of make them work within that story.
Hmm.
But there was no real logical reason to change that song.
No, not really. But then, speaking of more changes with Aunt Sarah, this this is where things really start to fall apart because Jim Deere and Darling come home. Well, they're the ones who pick up Lady at the pound instead of Aunt Sarah. And then they kick Aunt Sarah out. It's like, okay. And then you've got the dog catcher showing up, forcing his way into the home. Because like with the original, Jim Deere and Darling are gone. Like all of the stuff, like Aunt Sarah has to pick her up. Aunt Sarah calls the dog catcher because she thinks that the dog has attacked the baby, which all of that makes
Mhm.
perfect sense. But because they have kicked Aunt Sarah out early, they have to come up with this whole convoluted thing with this dog catcher showing up saying that he's seen their dog with this dog that he's looking for and he just knows he's around here. So he's got to come in and wait for the dog to show up. How does that make any sense at all? And how does it make sense that Jim Deere and Darling are just okay with him forcing his way into their home, ordering coffee, sitting down there, waiting for the dog to show up? It makes no sense. I was just like, what on earth is happening here?
It kind of felt like an 80s movie where like the daughter is dating a bad boy and the cop shows up and he's like, "Yeah, your daughter's dating a known felon. I know he's going to be here later." Like that. And that's kind of what it came back to, the way that that whole scene played.
I suppose, but just even if that was the dog catcher's thinking, the reactions of Jim Deere and Darling made no sense to me.
Oh, I agree. There's no there is nothing in this back quarter that makes a lot of sense. That would just be what I kind of interpreted it as.
Hmm. And then to have the whole fight scene with the rat, both taking too long. Like it lasted a lot longer than the original. At least felt like it. Maybe it didn't. It felt like it to me.
Well, that was the whole movie.
But it's more believable in the original that nobody showed up in the middle of the fight because it's just Aunt Sarah and she's kind of an old lady. So it's like
And she was
maybe
sleeping.
she didn't hear
Yeah.
it. Maybe she was asleep. But the dog catcher and Jim Deere and Darling are downstairs sitting up drinking coffee, and there's a battle going on above their heads. Dogs barking, things knocking over, and nobody shows up until the baby starts crying. She's like, "Oh, is that my baby? You better go check on him." Did you not hear the dog fight happening upstairs?
I mean,
Um,
Victorian level floors were quite a lot thicker back in the day.
yeah, I was gonna say soundproof floors.
Daggone quality built houses.
That seems unlikely.
Those really plush carpets.
Yeah.
I feel like you are giving them far too much credit here.
The rats and dogs back in the early 1900s had a better sense of propriety when it came to that stuff. They may knock
They
stuff
fought
over.
silently like gentlemen.
Exactly. That's why they called them. That wasn't the silent generation, but anyway. That's why the next generation was silent.
Yeah, that none of that made sense to me. And then again, stretching things out, you have the dramatic scene of him being taken away and Jock and Trusty going after him, and then having Jock have weird little science fiction-y senses and like the camera flying around town. It's like, what, why? Why are you stretching this out? The original had plenty of drama.
They're turning Jacques into the next great Marvel hero.
Oh, uh, it almost did have that kind of a feel, like Spidey sense or something.
Yeah.
But it was strange. It was just, again, I feel
Oh.
like they were stretching it out.
Oh, that reminds me. So another weird thing about the live action is that Trusty called his nose Old Reliable, which was his
Yeah.
grandfather
Yeah, that was
in the
another weird
original.
change.
That was so weird. It's like, why did
Very
we
odd.
why?
Why was Old Reliable his grandfather, and now suddenly that's what he calls his nose? Like, what was wrong with him having a grandfather?
Maybe his grandfather was inside his nose.
Oh, it's like in Muppet Treasure Island where Fozzie has a little man in his
Mr.
finger.
Bimbo!
Yes. The spirit of his grandfather lives with him in his nose. That's the next great sequel right there.
Really setting up your Marvel movie cinematic universe.
Yes, you're darn right I am. Which, on the subject of Trusty, okay, I know that they're trying to make it like this movie, as much as the last one, was very focused on like Lady and Tramp or Angel and Scamp or whoever the main characters are. But the fact that they took away Trusty being the one that was hit by the wagon and his sacrifice
Yeah,
really sat badly with me.
yeah.
That is true. That was another weird change.
I mean, they were basically pointless in the movie.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
didn't do anything. Hell,
yeah.
they didn't even ask for Lady's hand in marriage.
No, yeah. Again, maybe because it was short, I don't know. They made the most of what they had in the original. They made everything make sense so well. They put everything together so perfectly. But with this one, it was like they were trying to change some things, but also trying to be the same. And in doing so, it just kind of was a convoluted mess.
The one last thing I will say in a positive aspect of this movie was like I think they brought the background to life well, like the downtown, they did a nice job with all of the scenery stuff.
Hmm.
And several of the dogs were rescue cases and all of they were adopted prior to the film's completion. So that was a nice part. Also, I think the stunt work that they had doing with the dogs or the CGI was relatively solid given how Disney can be when it comes to CGI.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not
I felt
everything, but
like in some ways this was a, I mean, all things aside, what they did with The Lion King visually was kind of amazing. However, there was no life to it.
no.
They succeeded too well in making the animals look lifelike. I feel like in some ways this was an upgrade, even though in certain scenes the CGI wasn't perfect. The fact that they used real animals
Hmm.
was a huge bonus for this movie, even if it wasn't perfect.
Right.
I think a issue I had with the animals and what they should have utilized. I'm not a fan of having movies and then they animate the mouth over it.
No,
Like,
that was another thing that I forgot to say. It would have been better if they hadn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
like if they were just like Milo and Otis, if you've ever seen that
Oh
movie,
yeah.
where
We
it's
were
just them
obsessed with that movie
talking.
as kids.
Yeah. So they're just talking over the cat and dog just sitting there. I think that's still fine and you can do that.
And it wasn't even that movie. There was so many movies when I was a kid growing up in the 90s where it was just you would have the
Yeah.
voiceover with the
Hmm.
and that was fine. That was all we needed.
Yeah.
I feel like having to have them have the moving mouths, not that it cheapens it in a way, but it almost kind of does.
I would say in this movie, though, the way they did it, you could barely see the mouths move some of the times on some of the characters. Like, I barely remember Jock's mouth was moving because
Well,
of how,
she
like,
does have all the hair, so
yeah, so, like, it was like, but I think a big problem I had with the acting, not to shame any of the little dog actors, I think they did wonderful, is that they did the Disney thing where they're like, oh, well, it's real life. They don't emote. And that's just not true with animals. They just don't emote like people or like a cartoon.
uh-huh.
Right.
Like, there's a part where Tramp's supposed to be scared. I don't quite remember what it was, but he's just standing there and they're like, oh, come here, boy, come here. And he's just standing there, like,
What?
and you're like, could you at least, like, I don't know, if you don't want to actually make the dog look scared, you could just CG his tail tucked behind his legs, maybe have him crouch down, kind of like, oh, I'm a little nervous. Just
Hmm.
like dogs, like, I think the only time that the dogs actually felt like they were acting was during the rabies scene where she's like rolling around and like it's very sweet and cute. And you're like, oh, look at that little dog roll around. She's having fun doing little tricks. But like that never really got captured. And a lot of times you're just staring at dogs and you're like
Yeah.
devoid of watching their CGI mouse move. This dog's just standing there.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of just dogs standing there, like just kind of bouncing because they're obviously panting, but they're supposed to be talking, so you don't get the panting. So they're just bouncing there, waving their head back and forth, talking. And you're like, this is a little boring.
No, I know what you mean because in watching it, like especially when you know that they're using real dogs, it makes sense that they wouldn't go out of their way to make them do a ton of crazy things because that's just going to add to the CGI budget. And I know that with
Yeah.
this one, they were trying to keep the budget down because this was going to be the Disney Plus one.
Right.
But it worked and it didn't because yes, they're real dogs, but also
Hmm.
I don't know that they put in enough effort to really train them because they are strays, and that is a plus that they would use rescue dogs and then
Yeah.
have them rescued at the end of the movie, like actually rescued and given families. But at the same time, I don't think they put enough time into training them to do a lot of things that you would normally get with a dog that had had many years of training to be a film actor. Because
Right.
with a lot of movies that I would have watched in the 90s, those animals were worked with for years to become
Hmm.
professional animal actors that could hit their marks and do their tricks and all the stunts and go here, go there. And you didn't get that with this. And it was
Yeah.
kind of noticeable in some of the scenes.
Yeah, I think if just like maybe the dogs wave their paw a little bit or something, or make them just not be standing there or sitting there. Like they just kind of sit and stand for the majority of the film. And
Yeah.
like if you just made them lay down or do a little roll or something, or maybe even scratching, there's not a single scene where the dog scratches themselves in this movie.
I think you might be right. That is a bit of an oversight, isn't
Which
it?
is so strange because in the sequel and in the first movie, like Tramp scratches himself a
Yeah.
lot. But
Yeah.
in the sequel, they specifically made that a plot point. So it just really stood out to me that he never scratched himself.
Well, he got older. He didn't need to scratch as much. He couldn't get his leg up, you know?
No, that is weird. I didn't even think of that, but you're right.
They don't lick their lips or anything like that.
I mean, at least they didn't use peanut butter. You know, they get it stuck on the roof of the mouth. The dog's like,
That would have been too noticeable.
yeah, a little bit. But no, yeah, you guys are definitely right on that aspect. It's that fine line, and sometimes I think the ways that have worked in the past are kind of looked at and poo-pooed
Hmm.
because, oh, we're Disney. We can go above and beyond that. People expect us to go to this level, you know?
I think part of it is probably the fact that I don't know, the more stuff like that is relied on, the more open you are to potential animal abuse. So they're trying to get away from that as much as they can, which is why a lot of animals are CGI these days,
I guess.
which
Yeah.
I can understand, but at the same time, you can still do it. You just need to make sure that you are putting in the time to actually train them. And I feel like the only reason they're not doing it is because it costs money. Like the
Yeah.
amount of training that it takes to make a dog do what you want it to do probably ends up getting to the point where it would rival the CG budget. And again, this is supposed to be one of the cheaper ones because this was the Disney Plus release. So I don't know if that was something that they factored in. And I kind of think it might have been. They just didn't want to put in the time to train the dogs to be able to do as many things as they would have needed to do to make it look really impressive. I don't know.
Hmm.
And again, I'm glad that they used actual dogs. They used rescue dogs. They rescued these dogs afterwards. So it is commendable. It's just the way they went about it. Well, in the real life story about the making of the film is good. The film itself just feels weak. I don't know. They didn't make it something that would stand the test of time, like Homeward Bound or The Incredible Journey
Right.
or the movies that I would have watched as a kid. It
Their
doesn't have
need
that same feel.
their need to promote certain messages was put above the story itself.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And I don't mean that like that's like you say, it's awesome that they did that, but yeah, you still have to think bottom line, what's going to make the best movie?
Yeah.
Because you can balance those two things.
Hmm. But yeah, on the whole, this is not one of the worst ones. This is a better movie than some. However, it is still very mediocre. And it is not one that I would go back to and watch again. This is kind of boring and a definite downgrade from the original. If you're wanting to watch Lady and the Tramp, I feel like most everybody is going to go for Lady and the Tramp, the original one, not Lady and the Tramp, the live action remake.
That is the hope.
I really can't imagine anyone watching this and thinking, oh, this is so much better than the original. It just seems like, again, why does this need to be made? I can't imagine anyone watching this and thinking that this is an improvement. I hate to be so negative on a movie, but I
But
don't
it's
know.
true though.
Yeah.
Honestly, there's a subsect of people I think that probably would go see this and prefer it over the original, or put it on the same level as the original because it's live action.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose. Some of them, I can see a case to be made for something being maybe not equal to the original, but a good movie in their own right. Like I liked The Little Mermaid. I think it is a good movie by itself, not looking at the original Little Mermaid. But with this, I don't feel like this is a good movie by itself. Even if you haven't seen the original Lady and the Tramp, this is just kind of boring for the most part. It has a few
Hmm.
scenes that are kind of funny, like the rabies scene, but I don't know, it's just kind of boring in the end. Anyway, I guess that is Lady and the Tramp. Well, I guess that is all I have to say about this one. Go see the original.
How would you guys rank these? And I know, grand scheme, which one will be number one? Obviously, it's the remake, but
Yeah. No, I'm
um,
sorry, but Scamp's Adventure for me.
Oh yeah,
oh
that
Yes,
man,
sorry.
I didn't even
it,
think about that one. But how, and obviously, kind of an offhanded question, but how do they fall for you?
for me the worst one is Lady and the Tramp 2, Scamp's Adventure. I was just so bored through that whole thing. I zero wish to watch that again ever. The remake, I could watch it again, I suppose. I would be bored, but it's fine. To me, it's not, I guess because of Pinocchio, it's definitely not awful, but eh, it's fine. But like to compare it to the original is the best. Nothing can compare. If you're gonna watch Lady and the Tramp, the original is the best.
Yeah. How about you, Katie?
So obviously the original's the best, but I'm having a hard time ranking one over the other because I could see myself sitting down and watching the second one again solely to rag on it with like friends. Like we're all just sit down and we're like, oh my gosh, this is an awful movie, and Scamp's basically just a bad version of Goofy. Sorry, Max from the Goofy movie. But oh,
I didn't even think of that, but
Nice.
maybe I suppose you are right. They just stole
Nice.
the plot of a Goofy movie and made it worse.
It definitely wasn't an upgrade.
but like I will say that whilst the live action is boring as well, like the dogs are cute, and I liked looking at the dogs. Like they were all very cute. I love schnauzers, so I love seeing Jock in the little outfits. That was very
Aw.
cute.
Yeah.
But it was so boring that I don't think I think it's just like I'd watch the original, but the other two I just like probably wouldn't watch again for equal amount of they're just bore me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also fair. For myself, well, I am a fan of bad movies, and that's quite a bit of what I cover on my channel. So that in mind, the remake and the sequel are equally tied for the best. No, I kid. they're, they're definitely, and like you guys have said, I mean, I kept checking the time or the how much time was left on the remake, but I can appreciate there was cute moments, but it was half an hour longer than it needed to be. And even at an hour
Hmm.
20, it was probably too long.
Yeah.
There was so much about it that didn't make sense. I would probably put the remake as worst just because I wasn't looking at the clock for Scamp and agreed with you, Katie. It's something you could sit down and kind of riff on and make fun of and stuff and go, oh well, that's silly. Why? I could probably mash them up and make something interesting, but it wasn't as long and it wasn't as, I guess, boring. And obviously the original is the best by several country miles.
Yeah. I could see that the second one could be something to watch because it is bad. So I guess I could give it a point in that department. I guess since I don't generally watch movies because they're bad, I do for the podcast and I like talking about them afterwards for the podcast.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't lie, you watched Pinocchio's A True Story.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of them as in what I would want to sit down and watch for no other reason than to watch a movie. I would 100% choose the remake over the sequel. But I could see a case to be made for wanting to watch a bad movie with someone and rag on it. So I guess the sequel does have that going for it. Okay, well, I think that probably wraps up our series on Lady and the Tramp. I'm sure we will be back for more episodes in the future.
Oh God, more episodes of Lady and the Tramp?
No.
Oh, no.
They've
Just
announced 15
another
sequels.
Oh, no.
Sometime in the future, we'll be back for something completely unrelated to Lady and the Tramp. But until then, do you want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you? Nikki?
You can find me here on YouTube at Trivial Theater. I would probably review something like Scamp Returns, or whatever the heck it's called. We can call him, but I would not outrightly probably do that. But yeah, you can check out movies that are random, obscure, straight up bad here on my channel. So,
And Katie?
And you can find me on Instagram. Katie Draws Things. I draw things that look better than Scamp's Adventure. No. Maybe. I don't know. I guess it depends on what you like. But
I would say your style has more life and care than Scamp's Adventure. Scamp's Adventure is cookie cutter Disney. Like they're
yeah.
just going for a basic Disney style.
I feel bad ragging on the art style a bit because it's obvious that like they let their like junior interns like hop on, like, you know, like people who are just like the in-between animators and the people who aren't like, they're not like top levels, they're top tier, and they're just like, hey, you know how you've like done 2 or 3 things, go make an entire movie now. And so I don't want to rag too much on the actual animation itself because it's honestly better than probably what I could do. So, you know.
The sequel, I don't have a problem with the animation and art. It is very generic Disney, but it was very competently made.
right.
My issue is more with script than the animation and art itself. So
Yeah, if you want to see like Disney, like obviously something really went wrong on the production of how the animation was made, watch the Hercules television show. Because my gosh, there is scenes where people's heads are just shrinking. It's so
it's like any 80s cartoons.
Yeah.
Like Gem and the Holograms, there's a character whose skin color changes like randomly between episodes, and G.I. Joe's people walk through walls, and understandable.
Like it's like obviously there was no budget being put into this. Like that is crazy, but I think that's probably the biggest offender I have ever seen Disney do. It is buck wild how crazy some of the animation goofs can be on that show.
You are making me really looking forward to when I get to that one.
You're a bit away from that, though. You've got to get through soccer season before you can do anything else.
It'll probably be a few years before I get to the Disney Renaissance era. I've never seen the Hercules animated series. I remember watching Aladdin, the animated series, when I was a kid. And I know Hercules was made around that time, but I don't think that ever played on our channels. So I didn't realize that Hercules was even a downgrade from Aladdin, the animated series.
Congratulations. You have tears now.
Apparently. Okay, anyways, well, that was a tangent at the end of the episode after we even said our goodbyes. So
yay, tangents!
Until the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Disney Movie Marathon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My Linktree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.